Chapter 51. No one knew where that person came from. After causing a panic in the crowd, he disappeared. Shun Yu calmed down for a while, barely suppressing the palpitations in his heart, and stood up from Shang Junlin's arms. "You don't look well. Let's go back first." Shang Junlin looked at Shun Yu's pale face and said with heartache. Shun Yu had been well nourished in the palace. He hadn't looked so pale for a long time. The only time Shang Junlin remembered was when Shun Yu fainted after entering Yuzhang Palace. "Your Majesty, I don't feel well." Shun Yu leaned in Shang Junlin's arms and frowned. Shang Junlin wrapped Shun Yu up without saying anything and walked back. "Let's go back first." Shun Yu nestled in the man's arms and didn't speak. He faintly felt out of breath and realized that there might be something wrong with his body. Shang Junlin moved quickly and carried Shun Yu all the way to the carriage. Just as they were about to leave, Imperial Physician Ji Yu walked out of the crowd. "Your Majesty, it's Imperial Physician Ji Yu." Eunuch Meng had sharp eyes and pulled Imperial Physician Ji Yu over. There was a young man beside Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Shun Yu couldn't care less. His vision turned black, and his heart felt like it was being squeezed by a hand. Shun Yu, who hadn't had a relapse for a long time, almost forgot how he felt when he had a relapse. Shang Junlin sat down with Shun Yu in his arms. Imperial Physician Ji Yu didn't dare to delay and stepped forward to take Shun Yu's pulse. After a long time, Imperial Physician Ji Yu released his hand and frowned. "Someone caused your illness." Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. He remembered that Shun Yu fainted for the first time in Yuzhang Palace because of this. After the incident, he had investigated the entire Yuzhang Palace. He had thought that nothing similar would happen again, but now it seemed that he had been too lenient. Imperial Physician Ji Yu quickly wrote down a prescription and said as he wrote, "Your Majesty, there is no need to be too worried. Your Majesty's body is in good condition now and there won't be any major problems. I have some medicine with me, but there are still some that Your Majesty needs to send someone to retrieve quickly." Shang Junlin ordered the hidden dragon guards to retrieve the medicine. Under Imperial Physician Gu's instructions, the palace servants built a tent that could shelter them from the wind. Shang Junlin carried Shun Yu and walked inside. Imperial Physician Ji Yu followed closely behind. "Young master." Eunuch Meng stopped the young man who was following behind Imperial Physician Ji Yu into the tent. "That's my younger brother. He can help me, Eunuch Meng. There's no need to worry." Imperial Physician Ji Yu explained. Only then did Eunuch Meng let him in. Shun Yu could vaguely feel the movements outside. He could feel Shang Junlin's worry and fear. He wanted to tell them that he was fine and not to worry, but he just opened his mouth and did not say anything. "Don't worry, nothing will happen." Shang Junlin tucked Shun Yu's hair behind her ear. It was not clear if he was talking to Shun Yu or himself. "Your Majesty, I need to perform acupuncture on Your Majesty." Imperial Physician Ji Yu finished speaking and turned his head to order, "Xiao Huai, take out the silver needles at the bottom right of the medicine box." Ji Yu Huai took out the silver needles and brought them over. Shang Junlin placed Shun Yu on the makeshift bed and said, "Other than Imperial Physician Ji Yu, the rest of you can leave first." "Yes." Eunuch Meng led the servants away and pulled the young man who did not want to move. Ji Yu Huai followed Eunuch Meng's pull and walked outside. He said softly, "But my brother is inside. His Majesty keeps a close eye on Your Majesty. Your brother is the one who will perform acupuncture. There's no other way. Otherwise, your brother would have to come out with us." Eunuch Meng pulled the young man to the side. "God bless, Your Majesty will be fine." She could not control the anxiety in her heart. Why did Gongzi? Everything was fine before. These days, this servant has strictly followed Imperial Physician Gu's instructions and urged Gongzi to have a good rest. Why did he? Eunuch Meng was also anxious. His Majesty valued Gongzi more and more. If something happened to Gongzi, no, Gongzi must be blessed by the heavens. While the people outside were anxious, Shang Junlin inside could not control himself. He could not stand the sight of the person who was talking to him with a smile just now lying on the bed with a pale face and closed eyes. Because of the pain, he frowned even after he fainted. Silver needles were pierced one after another, causing Shen Yu's fingers to curl up in pain. Shang Junlin sat at the side and held Shen Yu's hand. "Is the trigger the same as the last time?" Shang Junlin's voice was cold. He was really angry. Imperial physician Ji Yu gave an affirmative answer. Shang Junlin clenched his other hand tightly. When he found the person behind the scenes, he must make that person suffer a fate worse than death. He must pay back the pain Shen Yu suffered 100 times, 1,000 times. The acupuncture treatment was to stabilize Shen Yu's physical condition. After half an hour, Imperial physician Ji Yu put away the needles and said, "Now, the weather is cold. Your Majesty, please be careful not to let Gongzi catch a cold. After this, Gongzi's body may be weak for a period of time. I will adjust the prescription and supplement it with medicinal cuisine to help Gongzi recover. Even a healthy person would suffer a great loss when he fell ill, let alone a weak person. Without 2 or 3 months of careful recuperation, Shen Yu would not be able to recover to his previous state." Shang Junlin gathered Shen Yu's clothes and hugged him again. Feeling the warmth, Shen Yu instinctively leaned towards the source. Being approached by Shen Yu should be a happy thing. However, Shang Junlin could not feel happy at this moment. He lowered his head and kissed Shen Yu's forehead. Shang Junlin hugged him even tighter. Imperial physician Ji Yu put away the silver needles and did not continue to disturb them. "I will go and take a look at the medicine." As soon as they came out, the hidden dragon guards also rushed to retrieve the medicine. Mu Shi followed Imperial physician Ji Yu to decoct the medicine. In a fit of anger, Shang Junlin ordered the hidden dragon guards to seal off the entire Kangqi mountain. Before they found out the identity of the person in grey, no one was allowed to leave. Some people were dissatisfied, but Shang Junlin was not in the mood to listen to them. He took down all the dissatisfied people and punished a few of them. The rest of them did not dare to speak anymore. Not long after, the Imperial Guards arrived. With the Imperial Guards, these people knew how serious the situation was and did not dare to make a fuss. It was not a good place to recuperate outside. Shang Junlin planned to bring Shen Yu back to the palace. Mu Shi came in with the decocted medicine. Imperial physician Ji Yu followed behind her. Behind them was a young man who was carrying a medicine box. "Your Majesty, you should find a place closer for Shen Yu to recuperate first. It would be better for him to return to the palace after 1 or 2 days. Imperial physician Ji Yu heard Shang Junlin's plan to return to the palace and gave his suggestion. It would be better for Shen Yu's body to be less bumpy. It would take more than half a day to travel from Kangqi Mountain to the palace. To be safe, they could not travel too fast. It would take longer. Shang Junlin was touched by Imperial physician Gu's last sentence. He ordered eunuch Meng, "Find a manor nearby. I will bring Shen Yu to stay there for a few days. Give me the medicine." Seeing Mu Shi coming over with the medicine, Shang Junlin reached out to take it. Thinking of Shen Yu's plan, Mu Shi boldly said, "Your Majesty, the manor that Shen Yu used to live in is not far from here. Why don't Your Majesty take Shen Yu there? Shen Yu has always wanted Your Majesty to see the place he likes. How far is it?" Shang Junlin thought of Shen Yu before they left the palace. He described the interesting things that happened in the manor when he was young. His eyes darkened. They had originally planned to go there in 2 days. "We can get there in less than half an hour." It was indeed not far. Instead of looking for a completely unfamiliar place, it was better to go to Shen Yu's manor. Shang Junlin fed the medicine to Shen Yu. When the spoon reached his mouth, the unconscious young man curled his lips and moved his head to the side. After feeding him several times, Shen Yu did not cooperate. The last time, he even spilled the medicine on Shang Junlin's clothes. Mu Shi trembled with fear as she watched from the side. She wanted to say that she would do it herself several times, but under Shang Junlin's gaze, she swallowed the words back down. "Maybe the medicine this time is bitter." Imperial physician Ji Yu explained. "All of you can leave first," Shang Junlin ordered. After everyone left, Shang Junlin picked up the bowl of medicine and drank a mouthful without changing his expression. He leaned over and sucked on Shen Yu's lips, passing the medicine bit by bit. Shen Yu was firmly imprisoned in Shang Junlin's arms. He could not escape and could only swallow the bitter medicine unwillingly. Under Shang Junlin's strong force, the bowl of medicine was quickly emptied. Shun Yu was so bitter that his entire face was wrinkled. Shang Junlin smoothed the wrinkles on his forehead and laughed softly. "You're still so restless even when you're asleep." The matter of Kangchi Mountain was handed over to the hidden dragon guards and the leader of the Imperial Guards. Shang Junlin brought Shun Yu and a group of palace servants to the manor. Imperial physician Ji Yu was also brought along. Because there were extra people, Imperial physician Ji Yu and eunuch Meng sat in the same carriage. On the way, eunuch Meng pretended to be curious and asked, "Why did Imperial physician Ji Yu come to Kangchi Mountain?" Xiao Huai said that he wanted to come. "I thought that since I'm not busy recently, I can come and see if there are any medicinal herbs I want." Imperial physician Ji Yu pointed to the medicine box on the side. "I found a lot of good medicine." Eunuch Meng glanced at the young man beside Imperial physician Ji Yu. The young man's sitting posture was proper and he could faintly see his dependence on Imperial physician Ji Yu. Ji Yu Huai was at a loss at this moment. He did intend to meet Shang Junlin, but he never thought that it would be in this way. He did not want to involve Imperial physician Ji Yu. The moment he came to Kangchi Mountain with Imperial physician Ji Yu, he gave up the idea of meeting Shang Junlin here. He could find another opportunity. There was only one Imperial physician Ji Yu. Even if there was a 1 in a million chance, he did not want Imperial physician Ji Yu to be in danger because of him. He ordered his people not to make a move. He did not know who injured Shen Gui Jun. At the same time, Ji Yu Huai was also very glad. He did not rashly make a move to test the waters. With Shang Junlin's importance to Shen Yu, once he made a move, even if it was just for a chance to talk to Shang Junlin face to face, he could only choose to stand opposite the emperor of the Great Huan dynasty. Knowing that Shun Yu was coming, everything had been prepared in the manor. Shang Junlin carried Shun Yu all the way into the bedroom and put her down before coming out to deal with the matter. "Your Majesty, it is a coincidence that Imperial physician Ji Yu appeared in Kangchi Mountain." Eunuch Meng took advantage of the time in the carriage to ask Imperial physician Ji Yu some questions. "Yen, inform me as soon as there is any progress." In the evening, Mu Shi brought over the freshly brewed medicine. Shang Junlin took the medicine and walked into the bedroom. Mu Shi tactfully did not disturb him. Shun Yu had not woken up yet. Shang Junlin first scooped up a spoonful of medicine and put it in front of Shun Yu's mouth. As expected, the youth dodged. After several attempts, Shang Junlin had no choice but to shackle the youth with one hand. He took a mouthful of medicine and put the bowl to the side. His other hand slightly pried open the youth's tightly pursed lips and bent down. Just like that, he fed the youth the medicine for the entire night. Shang Junlin took the bowl of medicine and went out to change his clothes on the way. When Shun Yu woke up, the first thing he felt was bitterness. The bitterness in his mouth lingered and his body felt heavy. Waves of coldness rushed over him, as if he had returned to his previous life. The man sitting by the bed pulled him back to reality. Seeing Shang Junlin staring at his lips, Shun Yu licked his lips. "Your Majesty, why are you looking at me like that? Did you do something bad behind my back?" Chapter 52. Because of the medicine, Shun Yu's lips were rosy compared to his pale face. It was as if there was a touch of red on the white snow, making him look even more attractive. Shang Junlin still remembered the feeling. The bitterness of the medicine couldn't cover up the sweetness he felt. The tip of her dark red tongue stuck out from between her teeth and lips, sweeping across her rosy lips. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. Shang Junlin put down the things in his hands and reached out to touch Shun Yu's forehead to check his temperature. It was not as cold as before. He gradually felt relieved. Imperial physician Ji Yu said that if Shun Yu woke up, there would be no major problems. Shun Yu was stunned by Shang Junlin's series of actions. "Your Majesty, what happened?" "He's fine now." "Your Majesty, do you still want to hide it from me?" Shun Yu narrowed his eyes. The grey-clothed man obviously did something to induce his illness. Knowing that Shun Yu was not easy to fool, Shang Junlin helplessly told him what happened at Kangchi Mountain. "I have already sent the hidden dragon guards and the Imperial guards to arrest him. There will be results soon." Shun Yu lay down for a long time and felt very uncomfortable. Especially in his mouth, There was a bitter taste that could not be ignored. The taste was different from any medicine in his memory. He propped himself up and wanted to sit up. Shang Junlin saw this and helped him up. He stuffed a soft cushion behind his back. How do you feel now? I'm fine. It's just that my mouth is very bitter. Shen Yu frowned and complained. What medicine is used this time? It's so bitter. Shang Junlin got up and came back with a cup of water. Drink some. Shen Yu really wanted to suppress the bitter taste in his mouth. He held the cup and drank a big mouthful. Hey! It's sweet. Shen Yu pursed his lips and drank it in small sips. Shang Junlin saw his eyebrows relax and answered, it's a new prescription made by Imperial Physician Gu. In order to maximize the effect of the medicine, he didn't add any medicine that could reduce the bitterness. No wonder I can feel the bitterness lingering in my sleep. Shen Yu understood. Is this honey water? It tastes so sweet. Yes, Shang Junlin nodded. I was worried that you would feel bitter when you woke up, so I specially prepared it in advance. After drinking the cup of water, Shen Yu ordered Shang Junlin to bring him some candied fruits and ate them. After eating the candies, the bitterness in his mouth was finally suppressed. Shen Yu was also in the mood to delve into other issues, such as, Your Majesty, how did I drink such a bitter medicine? Shen Yu was well aware of his willfulness in certain aspects. It was fine when no one indulged him, but when someone indulged him, it was impossible for him to drink such a bitter medicine, especially when he was in a comatose state. In his previous life, he had fallen into a coma many times because of his illness. Every time, his subordinates and doctors were helpless. They could only wait until he woke up to take the medicine. The doctor who treated him had told him more than once that every time he fell into a coma, he was worried that he would never wake up. He told him to change his temperament and not be so resistant to taking medicine when he was in a coma. Obviously, taking medicine when he was awake was very satisfying. Shen Yu thought, I also don't want to take medicine when I'm awake. I can drink it every time without changing my expression because I have no other choice. When I'm in a coma, my body is controlled by instinct. It just reflects my instinct to not like bitter medicine. Shen Yu recalled the bitter taste in his mouth when he woke up. Compared to his previous life, the taste was even worse. It was definitely not something he could drink when he was in a coma. He became more curious. After asking, Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin's expression did not change. If you are curious, I will feed you again later. Then you will know. Shen Yu thought for a while and put this question aside. He asked something more important. I remember that I fell ill after I met the man in grey. Was it because of him? Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's wrist and rubbed it. It's very likely, but we can't rule out other factors. It was because of this that Shang Junlin asked the hidden dragon guards and the Imperial army to surround Kangqi Mountain. From the time they got off the carriage to the time they met the man in grey, anyone they met in between could be a problem. Your Majesty, I want to go out for a walk. Shen Yu was unable to sleep after lying down for an entire afternoon. Shang Junlin brought clothes and helped Shen Yu change. Shen Yu was already used to the Emperor's habit of dressing him up. He stretched out his arms and let Shang Junlin help him put on his coat and cloak. Shen Yu's pale face was hidden behind the white fur collar. Shang Junlin tidied up his hair and held his belt as they walked out of the room. This time, Shen Yu almost used up half of his energy. Shen Yu could not exert any strength. He leaned on Shang Junlin's body and let the man carry him. Shang Junlin felt a weight on his body after taking 2 steps. He looked at the young man who was brazenly using his strength to walk and laughed. Where do you want to go? I will carry you there. Shen Yu shook his head and decided to walk on his own. Shang Junlin was not angry when he was rejected. He supported most of Shen Yu's weight and took him for a walk in the courtyard. The sky was not completely dark yet. The sunset spread from the horizon and dyed half of the sky red. Shen Yu looked up and sighed. It's so beautiful. It's a pity that it's sunset. You can't see it today, but you can see it tomorrow. It's not a pity. Shang Junlin broke Shen Yu's sadness. Your Majesty is right. Shen Yu changed the topic. Your Majesty just mentioned Imperial Physician Gu. How did Imperial Physician Gu happen to meet us? Shang Junlin replied, he took his younger brother to Kangqi Mountain to pick herbs. After you fainted, He saw you in the crowd and came over. Where is Imperial Physician Ji now? He is in the village. Shang Junlin seemed to know what Shun Yu was going to ask next, so he added, his younger brother is also there. Shun Yu walked for a while and realized that this was the place he wanted to take Shang Junlin to. He was surprised. Your Majesty, why are you here? The situation was urgent. Your maidservant said this place was closer, so we came over. Shang Junlin wanted to see the place where Shun Yu used to live. He thought that Shun Yu had always wanted to come here. If he missed this opportunity, he might be disappointed. Therefore, he agreed to Mu Shi's proposal. Before Shun Yu fell into a coma, he was worried that he would not be able to come to the village. He did not expect that when he woke up, he was already in the village. He was pleasantly surprised. Shun Yu woke up, but Shang Junlin was still worried. He asked Eunuch Meng to invite Imperial Physician Ji Yu. The main reason for bringing Imperial Physician Ji Yu to the village was to make it easier to deal with Shun Yu's sudden situation. Imperial Physician Ji Yu rushed over as soon as he heard the news. Ji Yu Huai followed behind him with a medicine box. Shun Yu walked around and was a little tired. Shang Junlin helped him to sit down in the pavilion. This manor occupied a large area. Shun Yu looked around. He had not returned to this place for many years, and his memories faded away. His memory slowly recovered under the scenery that he could see. Your Majesty, look over there. Shun Yu pointed to a big tree not far away. When I was young, I had people build a small swing there. Then, one year, there was a rainstorm and the rope broke. I was sad for a long time. Shang Junlin looked in the direction Shun Yu pointed. It was a very big tree. It was so big that 3 people would not be able to encircle it. A thick branch stretched out horizontally. Traces of ropes could be vaguely seen on it. Shang Junlin could almost imagine a little dumpling sitting under a tree and swinging on a swing. Sunlight shone through the gaps between the leaves, and mottled light and shadow fell on the little dumpling's body. The breeze blew through his hair, and the little dumpling grew up bit by bit, turning into a young man. His silhouette turned from blurry to clear, and gradually became Shun Yu's current appearance. Your Majesty, Imperial Physician Ji Yu is here. After getting permission, Imperial Physician Ji Yu first checked Shun Yu's pulse. Putting down his hand, Imperial Physician Ji Yu breathed a sigh of relief. Gui Jun is fine now. Next, he just needs to recuperate. Shang Junlin also breathed a sigh of relief. Feeling the strength of the hand holding his wrist lessen, Shun Yu smiled at Shang Junlin to comfort him. It's okay. Your Majesty, don't worry. In his previous life, he lived for more than 10 years with such a weak body. There was no reason for him to have an accident so early in this life. After comforting Shang Junlin, Shun Yu looked at the boy standing behind Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Looking into the boy's eyes, Shun Yu was stunned. Although the boy's eyes were still a little immature, it was not difficult to see his master's fierceness. No matter how well he pretended, he could not change his bloodthirsty nature. Is this Imperial Physician Gu's younger brother? Shun Yu put away his complicated thoughts and pretended to be curious. Yes. His name is Ji Yu Huai. Imperial Physician Ji Yu pulled the boy. This is the Shun Gui Jun I mentioned to you before. That is His Majesty. It was the first time Ji Yu Huai officially met the two of them. Whether it was the Emperor or Gui Jun, they were very different from what he had imagined. Ji Yu Huai hid the distracting thoughts in his eyes and respectfully bowed to the two of them. Shun Yu calmly looked at the boy for a while and asked, "The Huai in your memory?" "It's the Huai in Tangerine grows in Huainan." Ji Yu Huai explained. Shun Yu nodded. Ji Yu Huai. So his name is Ji Yu Huai. Shun Yu thought of the person in his previous life and couldn't help but sigh. In front of the people he cared about, the crazy wolf would also show a docile side. He wondered what kind of path Imperial Physician Ji Yu would take in the future if nothing happened to him in this life. What are you thinking about? Why are you so lost in thought? Shun Yu sat on the bed in a daze and was poked in the face. Shun Yu rubbed his face and said, "I'm just thinking that Imperial Physician Ji Yu and Ji Yu Huai don't look alike. Are they biological brothers?" Gui Jun has been thinking about this since last night. Shang Junlin lowered his eyes and sat on the bed. Gui Jun seems to be paying special attention to a certain person. Why is that? Isn't His Majesty curious? Shun Yu acted as if he didn't feel Shang Junlin's dissatisfaction. That Jiyu Huai is not as simple as he looks. I know. He was also involved in the matter of Fei Meng. The hidden dragon guards found out that he was also looking for the mastermind, so they didn't pay much attention to him. Shang Junlin touched Shun Yu's body temperature. Shang Junlin's hand was very warm. Shun Yu subconsciously rubbed against his palm. Why is he also concerned about Fei Meng? Shun Yu thought about it. In his previous life, he met Jiyu Huai a few years later. At that time, it had been some time since the Fei Meng incident. Shun Yu wasn't sure if he was involved in the Fei Meng case before he met Jiyu Huai. If he was, what was his role in it? If Gui Jun wants to know, you can ask him to come and ask him. After knowing that Jiyu Huai had nothing to do with the mastermind, Shang Junlin didn't pay much attention to him. There were very few people in this world that he cared about. Now, Shun Yu was one of them. In other words, from the beginning to the end, there was only one Shun Yu. I think it's better not to. It's not good to scare him. If he really cares about the existence of Fei Meng like His Majesty said, he will take the initiative to look for him. Knock knock. Someone knocked on the door. Come in. Mu Shi came in with the medicine. Before she even got close, Shun Yu could already smell the bitter smell that made people uncomfortable. He couldn't figure out how he drank this medicine when he was unconscious. Shang Junlin took the medicine. Mu Shi tactfully retreated. Shun Yu grabbed the quilt and asked softly, Your Majesty, I'm already awake. I don't need to drink this medicine, right? Gui Jun is already so old. Why are you still afraid of drinking medicine? Shang Junlin walked to the bedside and sat down. The medicine he drank before was modified by Imperial Physician Ji Yu, so it wasn't that bitter. This medicine was different. Shun Yu felt uncomfortable just by smelling it. In his previous life, he didn't feel much after drinking so much medicine. This time, with Shang Junlin around, Shun Yu didn't want to drink the bitter medicine. Shang Junlin supported Shun Yu's shoulder with one hand to prevent him from shrinking back. His other hand held the medicine firmly and coaxed in a low voice, Be good. Jun will feed you. How do you feed me? Shun Yu was vigilant. Shang Junlin took a mouthful of the medicine and leaned over. He showed Shun Yu how he fed him the medicine last time. Chapter 53. Shun Yu felt something warm on his lips, and then the bitter medicine was poured into his mouth. Oh! Shun Yu resisted and pushed the man who was half on top of him. Unfortunately, all his resistance was in vain. The tip of the man's tongue pried open his teeth. The purpose of the man was to feed him the medicine, so he didn't go too deep. Shun Yu's hand that was pressing on the man's clothes unconsciously tightened. The medicine that he didn't have time to swallow slid down the corner of his mouth and wet the collar of his neck. Shun Yu couldn't refuse. On one side was the man's strong tongue, and on the other side was the medicine that was constantly being poured into his mouth. He could only comply with the man's wishes and swallow the medicine bit by bit. After swallowing the medicine in his mouth, Shun Yu felt that his lower teeth were gently scraped. He looked up and saw the man get up as if nothing had happened and was about to continue feeding him. Shun Yu didn't care about anything else. He grabbed the bowl of medicine and drank it without hesitation. He finally figured out how Shang Junlin fed him the medicine when he was unconscious. However, Shun Yu felt that it was better not to know. Seeing that Shun Yu obediently drank the medicine, Shang Junlin's eyes flashed with a trace of regret. He brought over the candied fruits that he had prepared earlier. Shun Yu ate some and finally felt that the bitterness in his mouth wasn't as bitter as before. Your Majesty, don't you want to eat some? Without waiting for Shang Junlin to answer, Shun Yu picked up a candied fruit and fed it to the man's mouth. Anyway, you suffered because of me. Your Majesty, you should taste the sweetness that I fed you. Shang Junlin lowered his eyes and ate the candied fruit in Shun Yu's hand. Is it sweet? Shun Yu tilted his head and looked at Shang Junlin's face. Yes. The candied fruit was sweet, but the candied fruit that Shun Yu fed him was even sweeter. After drinking the medicine, Shun Yu's clothes were a little dirty. He didn't want to lie on the bed anymore, So he ordered Shang Junlin, "Your Majesty, my clothes are dirty. Quickly bring me a clean one." As he wished, Shang Junlin found him a set of clean clothes. Shen Yu stained his inner clothes. Before he changed his clothes, he glanced at Shang Junlin and said, "Shouldn't your Majesty look away from indecent things?" She motioned for him to leave quickly. Shang Junlin remained unmoved. "Which part of your body have I not seen?" Shen Yu looked at him without saying anything. Finally, Shang Junlin was defeated. "I will turn around and not look, okay?" After that, Shang Junlin turned around. Shen Yu saw that he really had no intention of leaving, so she quickly changed her clothes and put on her outer robe. "Okay." Shang Junlin turned around and walked over to help Shen Yu tidy up his messy outer shirt. Breakfast had already been prepared. Knowing that the two masters had already woken up, Eunuch Meng ordered the servants to serve the food one by one. Shen Yu sat opposite Shang Junlin and pointed at a few dishes that he had never seen before. "Are these the new dishes developed by the plantation? This is a medicinal cuisine specially prepared for you." Shen Yu had eaten medicinal cuisine before, and without exception, there would be a faint medicinal smell. However, the dishes in front of him, even though he was so close, he couldn't smell a trace of medicinal smell. Shen Yu picked up a piece with her chopsticks and put it into her mouth. The meat was fresh and tender, and the taste was indeed different from what Shen Yu usually ate. However, it didn't taste like the medicinal cuisine that he had imagined. "I know that you don't like the smell of medicinal herbs, so these medicinal cuisines have been used to suppress the smell of medicinal herbs." Shang Junlin seemed to have sensed Shen Yu's doubts and explained. "Did you find the grey-clothed man?" After eating, Shen Yu thought of the strange grey-clothed man. He was very sure that he didn't know that person. Why would that person find him? What made him even more puzzled was, how could his illness be induced just by passing by? Shen Yu's illness had been there since he was a child. All the doctors who had treated him said that his illness came from his mother's womb. Shen Yu had never doubted this point. Now, it seemed that there was a hidden story behind this matter. As they were talking, the leader of the Imperial Guards asked to see Shen Yu outside. Shang Junlin didn't hide it from him and let him in to report. The leader of the Imperial Guards first greeted Shen Yu and Shang Junlin before he started to talk about business. "I sent people to search the mountain for a night and successfully caught a few people with evil intentions. They were sent to the prison for interrogation. The person that your Majesty mentioned was also caught, but it wasn't my people who caught him." "Who was it?" "I brought them along with me. The people who came were wearing black uniforms." According to the leader of the Imperial Guards, these people were also active in the vicinity of Kangchi Mountain and happened to catch the grey-clothed man who wanted to escape. If it wasn't for them, the grey-clothed man might have really escaped. The grey-clothed man was very familiar with the Imperial Guard's style. He avoided all of their detection routes and also had a way to deal with the hidden dragon guards. After a few rounds of camouflage to avoid detection, he disappeared from Kangchi Mountain without a trace. "Thank you very much. If you need anything, you can ask directly," Shen Yu said. "We are just following our master's orders. There's no need for you to say anything." "Thank you," one of the black-clothed men replied. Shen Yu wasn't surprised by this reply. These two men looked like well-trained secret guards. He just didn't know which family in the capital had the ability to train such a team. After the Imperial Guards left, Shen Yu told Shang Junlin about his doubts. Shang Junlin pondered for a moment. "As far as I know, the existing aristocratic families in the capital are not enough to train such a group of people. Shen Yu, no matter who they are, they have helped us. We should thank them properly." "Shang Junlin, you are right." "Shen Yu, your Majesty, do you think that these people are the same group of people who are investigating the Fei Meng incident?" "Shang Junlin, do you mean that these people are Jiyu Huai's people?" Shen Yu nodded, but we can't be completely sure. Shen Yu suddenly remembered that in his previous life, Jiyu Huai always had a group of people who were loyal to him. He had seen the strength of those people. If he had to say, they could be compared to the black-clothed men this time. The grey-clothed man was locked up in the dark prison and there would be special people to interrogate him. Shang Junlin and Shen Yu only needed to wait for the results. Shun Yu found that Shang Junlin liked to stick to him even more. Except for the time when he had to review memorials every day, he liked to spend the rest of his time with him. If Shun Yu didn't find it boring to review memorials next to him, Shang Junlin wouldn't even let him leave during that time. Your Majesty, you can't do this. Shun Yu helplessly looked at Shang Junlin, who was holding onto his clothes. I just want to go out for a walk. You can wait for me to finish my official business first. Shang Junlin didn't let go. Shun Yu argued, Your Majesty, we need to be independent of each other. Even if we are an ordinary husband and wife, we can't always stick together. After much persuasion, Shun Yu finally won some private time for himself. You. Shun Yu turned around and saw a young man in a navy blue short-sleeved shirt walking towards him. Young Master Ji Yu. Can I have a private talk with you? Ji Yu Huai glanced at Mu Shi, who was beside Shun Yu, and added, It's about Fei Meng. Of course. Shun Yu turned to Mu Shi and said, You can leave first. The fish had taken the bait. Originally, after confirming that his body was fine, Imperial Physician Ji Yu could leave. Shun Yu wanted to confirm some things, so he asked Shang Junlin to keep Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Imperial Physician Gu's younger brother, Ji Yu Huai, was also asked to stay. The next step was to create an opportunity for Ji Yu Huai to meet him alone. Shun Yu wasn't worried that Ji Yu Huai would harm him. His people were all in the manor, and there were also the hidden dragon guards in the dark. As long as Ji Yu Huai was smart, he wouldn't choose to do anything to him under such circumstances. If he really did do anything to him, he could just get rid of him directly. There was no need to say anything else. You've been waiting for me. Without any outsiders, Ji Yu Huai didn't hide himself anymore. The young man's facial features were still young, but his aura gradually overlapped with that of the person Shun Yu knew in his previous life. Especially his eyes, which were like a bottomless abyss, overflowing with hostility. I just guessed that you would come to find me. Shun Yu leisurely poured himself a cup of tea. Do you want it? It's the best rain mist silver needle. In his previous life, that person told him before he took action that if there was a chance, he would invite him to drink the rain mist silver needle. Unfortunately, he only received the tragic news of that person dying together with the enemy. This time, he came back with his memories, so he treated it as the last appointment in his previous life. Without waiting for Ji Yu Huai to answer, Shun Yu poured a cup for him. Do you like to make your own decisions when you're with Her Majesty? Ji Yu Huai took a sip. Children shouldn't meddle in the affairs of adults. Shun Yu slowly took a sip of tea. You should cherish this opportunity. Next time, if you want to drink it, you can only make it for yourself. Ji Yu Huai was speechless. After a long while, he said, You're not much older than me. Yes, Shun Yu directly admitted. But I'm married. Haven't you heard? After marriage, I'm an adult. Ji Yu Huai took a deep breath and decided to get down to business. I want to know if the Imperial Palace is involved in the matter of Fei Meng. From the clues he found, the Imperial Palace and Fei Meng were inextricably linked. I can't guarantee others, but I can be sure that Her Majesty is absolutely not involved in the matter of Fei Meng. I was the one who suggested to investigate Fei Meng. Shun Yu's expression became serious. I believe you. Ji Yu Huai took a deep look at Shun Yu, took out a secret letter from his chest, and pushed it in front of Shun Yu. This is the clue my people found. You may have found some of it as well. The people who caught the grey-robed man were your people, right? Shun Yu didn't take the secret letter, but asked about another matter. Ji Yu Huai, yes, before the cooperation, I should have shown you some sincerity. Besides this time, the people who shouted out the identity of the King of Yu in public were also arranged by me. Shun Yu, what is your purpose? I want to find the initiator of Fei Meng and avenge my family. Ji Yu Huai didn't beat around the bush. When he said these words, his tone was cold. Before the matter of Fei Meng is completely resolved, I can only say this much. Ji Yu Huai loosened his clenched fist. If something happens, I hope Her Majesty can protect my brother. When the time comes, don't worry about me. Imperial Physician Ji Yu definitely doesn't think so. Shun Yu shook his head. If not, how could Ji Yu Huai survive after being implicated in such a big case in his previous life? It was impossible to investigate the truth of his previous life. Fortunately, he had changed Imperial Physician Gu's ending. When Shang Junlin finished his work and came looking for him, Ji Huai had already left. Shun Yu was staring at the empty cup in a daze. What did Ji Huai say to you? Shun Yu wasn't surprised that Shang Junlin knew about his private meeting with Ji Huai. He had already talked to Shang Junlin about it. He handed the unopened secret letter to the man. It's about Fei Meng. Shang Junlin put the secret letter aside and said thoughtfully, why didn't Ji Huai come directly to us? Maybe he has a knot in his heart. If he is really a child of that family who survived. Thinking about it, Shun Yu felt that if his family died because of the imperial family's muddle-headedness, he wouldn't be nice to the imperial family either. Of course, this was on the premise that his family wasn't like Shun Bei Hu. It was better not to have them. Your Majesty, don't you want to see what's inside? After returning to the room, Shun Yu saw that the man had no intention of opening the secret letter and asked, Gui Jun, come and look with us. Shun Yu walked over and was pulled onto the man's lap. His waist was tightly hugged. Shun Yu struggled, but the man didn't move. This position was too dangerous. Shun Yu didn't dare to move too much. He could only accept his fate and nestled in the man's arms. Shang Junlin opened the secret letter and Shun Yu looked at it. Indeed, as Ji Huai said, they had already found some things inside, but there were also many things they hadn't found out yet. For example, Fei Meng didn't originate from Da Huan, but was brought by a woman from a foreign vassal. Why didn't the palace record such important information? Shun Yu asked. Shun Yu was puzzled. Someone must have deliberately erased it. After reading the secret letter, Shun Yu was about to get up. After reading it, Your Majesty should let me go. Shun Yu suddenly shut his mouth and turned to look at Shang Junlin. Gui Jun neglected us today because of someone else. Shouldn't you compensate us? The man murmured discontentedly. Gui Jun even poured tea for him. Chapter 54. Shang Junlin felt the side of his neck being bitten. With the previous experience, he didn't dare to use too much force this time. He only used the tip of his teeth to bite a small piece of skin and gently rubbed it. This was undoubtedly more unbearable than direct pain. Shun Yu was tightly held in the man's arms. He couldn't move and could only let Shang Junlin do whatever he wanted. Didn't His Majesty acquiesce? Shun Yu asked while breathing unsteadily. Shun Yu had hinted to Shang Junlin from the beginning that he wanted to meet Ji Huai alone. He originally thought that Ji Huai would meet Shang Junlin face to face. After all, in his memory, Ji Huai had always been a decisive and ruthless person. In order to achieve his goal, he would put everything aside. Maybe it was because Imperial Physician Ji Yu was still alive in this life, so Mad Wolf was willing to put shackles on himself. What are you thinking about? Noticing that Shun Yu was absent-minded, Shang Junlin increased his strength as if he was punishing him. Shun Yu didn't have time to think about anything else. I think His Majesty just found a random reason to bite me. Shun Yu muttered discontentedly. How can His Majesty think so? If His Majesty didn't refuse to take the initiative, I wouldn't have to take it personally. The wet feeling turned to the side of his face and spread all the way up to his delicate jawline, small chin, and finally fell to the corner of his lips. Shang Junlin stared at the soft lips in front of him. His eyes were as dark as the abyss. He once kissed the lips of the young man when he was unconscious. Even though there was a bitter medicine between them, he couldn't ignore the touch at that moment. It was so soft. With the body temperature of the young man, just a touch could bring an indescribable shiver. At that time, he was in a hurry to feed the young man the medicine and ignored all other feelings. Only when he thought about it later, the feeling of being ignored emerged from the depths of his memory. It was deeply rooted in his mind. Feeling the man's breath getting closer and closer to his lips, Shun Yu tilted his head. The man's kiss that should have fallen on his lips fell to the corner of his lips. Shun Yu stubbornly tilted his head and refused to let Shang Junlin's lips touch his. Why is you unwilling? Shang Junlin did not force her. He continued to peck and nibble on Shun Yu's face, leaving waves of numbness. Shun Yu himself couldn't tell the reason. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel wronged. Let go of me. Shang Junlin compromised. He kissed Shen Yu's forehead to comfort her and let her go. Shen Yu slid down from Shang Junlin's body and sat aside. She looked a little dazed. Why do you feel wronged? Shang Junlin got up and squatted in front of Shen Yu. You and I are husband and wife. It's normal for us to do these intimate things. I know you might not be used to it for the time being. I'll wait for you to get used to it. He had given them enough leeway, but he was also strong enough that they could not refuse. Shen Yu touched his face blankly. Am I so obvious? You is about to slap your unwillingness on my face. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and squeezed it gently. You and I are husband and wife. We can do any intimate things. Shen Yu didn't know what he was thinking. He didn't resist Shang Junlin's intimacy. He even liked it a little. However, he didn't want to break through the last line. It was as if something was warning him that once he broke through, something he didn't want to see would happen. I know. After a moment of silence, Shen Yu whispered, I will. Shang Junlin covered his lips with his palm and interrupted his unfinished words. It's my fault for making you feel uneasy. You doesn't have to force yourself to cater to me. What Shang Junlin wanted was a willing Shen Yu. He could feel that Shen Yu had a knot in his heart. Although he didn't know where this knot came from, he would find a way to untie it. Your Majesty, hug me. Shen Yu was never sad. Putting away those messy thoughts, Shen Yu thought to himself, let nature take its course. If something really happened, he believed that he had the ability to solve it. Shang Junlin stood up, leaned over, and held Shen Yu tightly in his arms. The man's biting cold breath gradually filled the empty space. Shen Yu was surrounded by the familiar breath and his heart gradually calmed down. After returning to the palace, I'll make tea for your Majesty. What would your Majesty like to drink? Shen Yu put his hands around the man's waist and buried his face in the man's arms. As long as it's made by you, I'll like it. The commotion caused by Kangchi Mountain was too big. Although the news was blocked, some ministers still received the news that His Majesty and the Emperor had been assassinated. It was also at this time that they found out that Shang Junlin had taken Shen Yu out of the palace. Admonishing memorials poured in like dancing snowflakes. They all urged Shang Junlin to stay in the palace and not make trouble. Nothing happened this time. It could be said that he was lucky. Who could guarantee that there wouldn't be any problems next time? What if there was? Shen Yu casually flipped through a few memorials piled up on the short table. They were all urging Shang Junlin to return to the palace. Their memorials all talk about these things. Shen Yu was slightly speechless. There are also some that talk about serious matters. Shang Junlin pointed to a small pile of memorials in front of him. Shen Yu put back the memorials in his hand, walked to Shang Junlin and sat down. Your Majesty can leave those unimportant ones to your ministers. It's too much of a waste of time for your Majesty to look through them personally. The Emperor's words are reasonable. Why don't the Emperor help me? While you're at it, leave those unimportant ones for your Majesty to deal with. Shen Yu bumped Shang Junlin. The Emperor and I are indeed of the same mind. After speaking, Shang Junlin pushed part of the memorials in front of Shen Yu. Shen Yu saw Fang Daren's name in the memorials. He took out the memorials and pushed them in front of Shang Junlin. Is there any result on Prince Yu's matter? Shang Junlin opened the memorials. The contents of the memorials were some of the information that Fang Daren had found. The details would be presented in the form of files after being sorted out. We have to wait for a while. Shang Junlin wanted to take this opportunity to find out what the previous emperor had left for Prince Yu. In the secret prison. Prince Yu thought that he would be able to get out soon. A few days later, he couldn't help but start to panic. No one interrogated him. Except for 2 meals a day, when the jailer came to deliver food, he almost never saw him. Shang Junlin seemed to have forgotten about him. The process of waiting was always torturous, especially when there was no one to talk to. Prince Yu became more and more impatient. He couldn't help but think, why didn't Shang Junlin interrogate him? Where were his people? Why was there no movement at all? What was happening outside? Shang Junlin dared to attack him. Did he really not care about the previous emperor? Prince Yu's biggest reliance was the things that the previous emperor had left for him. It was also because of these things that he could have such thoughts. It was obvious that the previous emperor favored him the most. Otherwise, why would the previous emperor give those things to him? It was easy to feed a person's ambition, let alone a prince who had been indoctrinated with the idea of fighting for power and profit since childhood. With each passing day, Prince Yu became more and more anxious. Finally, when the jailer came to deliver food, he couldn't help but stop him. "I want to see His Majesty." The jailer knew this person's identity. He also knew that the higher-ups had ordered him to only lock him up and not do anything. He didn't know what the higher-ups were thinking. The jailer didn't dare to hide the news and reported it to the higher-ups. In the blink of an eye, Shang Junlin received the news from the secret prison. Is His Majesty going to see him? Shun Yu sat by the window. He held his sleeves with one hand and held the teapot with the other. He slowly poured out the steaming hot tea. The beauty sat by the window and boiled the tea smoothly. No matter how one looked at it, it was a kind of visual enjoyment. They had already returned to the palace. Seeing that the ministers were about to give up if His Majesty didn't return to the palace, and Shun Yu's health was getting better, it was more convenient to stay outside the palace. After discussing, they decided to return to the palace in advance. After returning to the palace, the ministers really stopped. Finally, they didn't have to find a pile of memorials to persuade the emperor to return to the palace. Shun Yu was greatly relieved. There's no need to see him. Shang Junlin walked to the opposite side of Shun Yu and sat down, admiring the young man's movements. Compared to seeing Prince Yu, he preferred to stay with Shun Yu in Yuzhang Palace. Even if he didn't do anything, he would still be in a good mood. Shun Yu deftly put the brewed tea in front of Shang Junlin. "Would Your Majesty like to try it?" Shang Junlin picked up the cup and took a sip. The fragrance lingered in his mouth for a long time. He praised, "You has good skills. I learned it in my free time. It's good that Your Majesty likes it." Shun Yu also poured a cup for himself. He learned how to brew tea when he went to Prince Yu's fief in his previous life. He learned it in order to help Prince Yu win over a reclusive great scholar. Later, it gradually became a pure hobby. Shun Yu was affected by his health. There were many things that he couldn't do. When he brewed tea, he could calm down and not think about those scheming things. Over time, this habit was retained. "I don't know if young Master Jiang and young Master He have guessed our identities." Shun Yu held the teacup. "I hope both of you can be successful." He Chung Yu and Shun Yu didn't know. He didn't have any interaction with this person in his previous life. However, he knew about Jiang Huiqing. If he wasn't implicated, he would definitely be able to rise to the top. Yu thinks highly of these two people. Shang Junlin rubbed the cup in his hand. Yu has good taste. He Chung Yu is the most outstanding person among the younger generation of the He family in Jiangnan. The He family in Jiangnan hasn't been an official since the reign of the previous emperor. I don't know why they are willing to let their most outstanding younger generation participate in this competition. They probably feel that Your Majesty is someone they can pledge their loyalty to. Why should Your Majesty care? What are they thinking? If He Chung Yu is really as outstanding as the rumors say, wouldn't he be able to display his strength better by serving the country? Otherwise, why would there be a saying of learn both civil and martial arts and serve the emperor's family? Yu is really... Shang Junlin shook his head. Yu has been paying attention to Jiang Huiqing. Is he really that outstanding? How should I put it? How about I make a bet with Your Majesty? If the winner this time is Jiang Huiqing, Your Majesty will agree to one of my requests. How about it? If Yu loses, can you take the initiative to kiss me? Shang Junlin pointed at his lips. Kiss here. Shun Yu thought about it and agreed. Your Majesty's orders have been completed. Eunuch Meng walked in with his head lowered. Shang Junlin put down his teacup and stood up. Yu, come with me. I want to show you something. What do you want to see? Shang Junlin walked in front of Shun Yu and held his hand. The two of them walked out side by side. Eunuch Meng followed behind the two of them. He looked down and thought to himself, Your Majesty is really paying more and more attention to Gui Jun. Now that he's interacting with Gui Jun, He doesn't even have much of an emperor's etiquette left. Passing through the corridor, what came into view was a century-old tree with thick branches. Under the tree, there was a swing quietly hanging from it. I couldn't restore your original swing, so I had them make a new one according to your preferences. Do you like it? Shang Junlin looked at the side of the young man's face. His eyes were filled with tenderness. Chapter 55. Shen Yu couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. He had only mentioned the swing to Shang Junlin once. He didn't expect that Shang Junyu would build a swing for him in Yuzhang Palace in the blink of an eye. A swing wasn't a big deal. What was rare was that as the emperor, Shang Junlin actually kept his matter in mind. I like it very much. Shen Yu turned around and met the man's tender eyes. He repeated, I really like it, Your Majesty. Let's go and take a look. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and walked towards the swing. The man's hand was warm and strong. Shen Yu's hand was curled up in the man's palm, like a tired bird that had found a shelter from the wind and rain. Shen Yu looked at the swing that had suddenly appeared and gave him a great surprise. The rope hanging on the swing was 2 fingers thick. There were green vines with white flowers wrapped around it. The seat below was very big enough for him and Shang Junlin to sit down together. Shen Yu walked around the swing and felt a little itchy. Your Majesty, I'll sit on it. Please push me. Shen Yu finished speaking and sat on the swing. For comfort, the wooden chair was covered with a thick velvet blanket to isolate the coolness of the wooden chair and reduce the hardness of the wooden chair. Shang Junlin walked behind Shen Yu and slowly pushed the swing. Shen Yu sat on the swing. As the swing rose and fell, the breeze brushed past his cheeks and raised his hair behind him. Every time the swing fell, Shen Yu's hair would be blown to Shang Junlin's body and hands. Shen Yu narrowed his eyes. After swinging for a while, he suddenly realized that it wasn't good to let Shang Junlin push him. The next time the swing fell, he pulled Shang Junlin's sleeve. What's wrong? Shang Junlin firmly grabbed the rope of the swing and stopped it. Shen Yu leaned sideways and looked up at him. I want Your Majesty to accompany me. Shang Junlin paused for a while. In the end, he couldn't resist the idea of playing on the swing with Shen Yu. He walked to Shen Yu's side and sat down. They didn't let the palace servants push the swing. Instead, they let the swing swing slowly. Shen Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's shoulder and talked about his childhood. At that time, Shen Qingran liked to show off to me. Count Shunbei made a swing for him in the courtyard. He liked it very much and dragged me to see his swing. Shen Yu's gaze slowly drifted away. The kind that I watched him play. It's been a long time. Shen Yu didn't really remember these things during the new year. Today, sitting on the swing, the long-lost memories were dug out. He laughed very happily. At that time, I was standing not far away and wanted to try it. I wanted to try the feeling of flying. But I knew that Shen Qingran wouldn't let me sit on it. He was always like this. Whenever he got something good, he had to show it off in front of me. Speaking of this, Shen Yu chuckled. At that time, I still had fantasies about Count Shunbei. I even naively went to Count Shunbei to ask for the same thing. The result was as you can imagine. It's Count Shunbei's fault. Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's hair. Later, I slowly understood that Count Shunbei was unreliable. No matter how much I wanted something, I wouldn't go to him. In fact, what kind of precious things could a child want? It was nothing more than the warmth behind those things. Unfortunately, Count Shunbei wasn't willing to give him even a little warmth. Let's not talk about Count Shunbei. Back to the swing. Later, when I slowly grew up, someone came to me with the title deed and said that there were some things left by my mother for me. That village was one of them. When I went to the village, I asked someone to make a swing. I tried it and found that the feeling was completely different from what I imagined. It won't happen again in the future. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's arm tightly. Huh? Shen Yu was surprised. A Yu won't have anything that he wants but can't get in the future. Shang Junlin couldn't change Shen Yu's past that he couldn't participate in. He could only make up for the regrets of the past bit by bit. But he could guarantee that with his participation in the future, Shen Yu wouldn't have the same regret. I'm not a child anymore. If I really want something, I'll get it myself. Shun Yu looked up at the sky. It's good now. I have your majesty. I'm already very satisfied. In this life, he was picked up for free. His destiny was in his own hands, and he could live it however he wanted. After returning to the palace, his life gradually got on the right track. Except for the bitter taste of the new prescription, Shun Yu didn't have any dissatisfaction. Can't we ask Imperial Physician Gu to change the prescription? Shun Yu drank the medicine in the bowl in one gulp. After drinking it, he immediately grabbed a handful of candied fruit and put it into his mouth. Endure for a few more days. After this treatment, you can change the previous prescription. Shun Yu faintly looked at the man who was standing and talking without thinking. Your Majesty said the same thing yesterday. Imperial Physician Gu said that it's too bitter to suppress. The flavored medicine will dilute the effect of the medicine. Bear with it for the sake of your health. Shang Junlin didn't want to see Shun Yu suffer. He had asked Imperial Physician Gu before. Compared to the discomfort of drinking medicine for a short period of time, he hoped that Shun Yu's body could recover as soon as possible. It had only been a few days, and the little bit of meat he had painstakingly gained was gone. His face was also smaller than before he got sick. Shun Yu knew that drinking medicine was for his own health. He just couldn't help but want to complain to Shang Junlin. Thinking of the reason for his illness, he asked, "What about the man in grey? Who did this to me? We couldn't find out who the mastermind was. No matter how we tortured him, he refused to talk. If we didn't find out in time, he would have taken his own life." Shang Junlin wanted to know who the mastermind was more than Shun Yu. However, they had too few clues and couldn't find out anything. Last time, when Yuzhang Palace was in trouble, he changed most of the people in Yuzhang Palace. However, he still couldn't find out who the mastermind was. It would be difficult this time too. The man in grey should be a man of sacrifice. He knows our movements very well. He also knows the style of the hidden dragon guards and the imperial guards. Shun Yu thought, let's not talk about the other two first. There shouldn't be many people in Dahuan who are familiar with the style of the hidden dragon guards. The hidden dragon guards were similar to men of sacrifice. They usually only acted in the dark. Many ministers only knew that Shang Junlin had such a force. As for how the hidden dragon guards looked like and how they did things, they didn't know at all. Shun Yu said, "We probably can't find out anything from the man in grey. Since the mastermind took action, he must have thought of a way out." Shang Junlin said, "I know. The man in grey really gave the interrogators a headache. It was almost a consensus that they couldn't get anything out of the men of sacrifice. However, the emperor didn't want to talk about the person who hurt the emperor. They could only keep interrogating him. When the man was on his last breath, the emperor finally sent an order, don't get anything out of him. Continue interrogating him. What does the emperor mean? The people who received the order looked at each other. The emperor is avenging the emperor. Don't let him have an easy time. Someone reacted. The emperor really thinks highly of the emperor. Another person sighed. Don't talk about it anymore. Let's get to work. We also need to vent our anger for the past 2 days. On the other side of the dark prison, the King of Yu heard the low and hoarse screams from not far away. He shrank back at the corner. He didn't know if those people did it on purpose. They always interrogated the prisoners not far away from him. It was fine if it happened once or twice. However, if it happened too many times, even the gods couldn't stand the screams that always lingered in his ears. In addition to the screams, there were also all kinds of hair-raising sounds of punishment, the sizzling sound of hot soldering iron coming into contact with skin, the teeth-numbing creaking sound, the sound of whips falling in the wind, and the sound of people being hit. After a few days, the King of Yu was mentally and physically exhausted. His dreams were filled with similar sounds. He couldn't stay here any longer. He had to get out. The King of Yu didn't care about the previous emperor's instructions. He didn't want to use those forces unless it was absolutely necessary. He only wanted to get out of this dark place and get away from those torturous sounds. Your Majesty, there is movement. The leader of the hidden dragon guards knelt on the ground respectfully and said, "Don't alert the enemy first. I want to catch the big fish behind the king of you in one go. Shang Junlin supported his head with one hand and sat on the throne. His tone was calm. Yes. The king of you used a special method to contact someone. He was finally relieved. When he heard the screams next door, it wasn't as unbearable as before. The screams next door continued. Occasionally, he could hear some whispers. They were all talking about how the emperor doted on Shungui Jun. The king of Yu sat by the wall and subconsciously thought of the elegant young man in blue. Shin Yu. What exactly went wrong that caused Shin Yu's attitude to change so drastically overnight? The king of Yu still couldn't figure it out. Shin Yu heard the king of Yu's movements from Shang Junlin. He was puzzled. Why did he suddenly lose his mind? With the king of Yu's cautiousness, it didn't make sense that he couldn't endure being imprisoned for a few days. I asked them to put the interrogation location near the king of Yu. Shang Junlin said calmly. But Shin Yu couldn't help but laugh. How did your majesty think of this method? Shin Yu could already imagine how torturous the king of Yu was during this period of time. The king of Yu was someone who couldn't tolerate noise. With that kind of noise lingering in his ears every day, it was already his limit for him to only take action now. It's because you taught me well. Shin Yu. What did I teach your majesty? Shang Junlin reminded him. Last time, you asked me to send a letter to the king of Yu's lovers. Shin Yu choked. Thinking of the king of Yu's bad luck during this period of time, he decided not to argue with Shang Junlin. Speaking of the secret prison, Shin Yu thought of another person who was imprisoned in the secret prison. Your Majesty, is there any news about the He family? Yes. Shang Junlin frowned slightly. They secretly arrived in the capital. In the capital, they didn't do anything. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, Shang Junlin only asked people to pay attention to their every move. For the time being, he didn't do anything else. The He family, the mysterious force behind the He family, and the king of Yu. Shin Yu connected the three together and couldn't help but have a new idea. Maybe the young master he was just a cover. If the king of Yu didn't get the help of the mysterious force because he saved the young master if that was the case, the king of Yu didn't need to spend so much effort to get the young master out of the secret prison. The king of Yu was a person who wouldn't do anything without benefits. If there weren't enough benefits, he wouldn't take such a big risk to save a person who was deeply imprisoned. Your Majesty, you should also pay attention to the young master his movements during this period of time. Shin Yu reminded him. I'll pay attention. Shang Junlin finished speaking, put down the memorial in his hand and approached Shin Yu who was standing on the other side. Does your highness still remember our bet? The imperial examination in spring is about to begin. Shang Junlin carried Shin Yu to the soft couch and gently put him down. Then, he leaned over. Shin Yu turned around and escaped from Shang Junlin's shackles. The outcome hasn't been decided yet. Your Majesty, why are you so anxious? Chapter 56. Shang Junlin supported himself with one hand on the soft couch and looked sideways at Shin Yu. I can wait, but don't find an excuse to not fulfill your promise. Shin Yu got up and sat to the side. Why is your Majesty so sure that I will lose? What if your Majesty loses? Of course, I will fulfill my promise. Shang Junlin slowly got up and sat down. The soft couch was still the same as before. Shang Junlin looked at the distance between him and Shin Yu and said, let's change to another soft couch. Why do you suddenly want to change it? This one is quite comfortable. Shin Yu weighed himself. It was very soft and big. Sometimes, he could even lie on Shang Junlin's lap. Shang Junlin pursed his lips and didn't say anything. There was no problem with the comfort of the soft couch. He just wanted to change it to a smaller one. It was just right for the two of them to sit inside, and he wouldn't be unable to reach Shin Yu on the other side. Your Majesty, Shin Yu moved closer to Shang Junlin and asked, why do you want to change it? Just now, Your Majesty was too far away from me. Shang Junlin didn't answer the question. Mr. Shin Yu was puzzled about the relationship between the two. After turning a corner, he suddenly realized something. He poked Shang Junlin's arm and said jokingly, does Your Majesty think that the soft couch is too big? What do you think? Shang Junlin took the opportunity to put his arm around Shun Yu's waist and pulled him into his arms. He was satisfied. After finding out the reason, Shun Yu was overjoyed. He laughed and fell on Shang Junlin's shoulder. "Your Majesty, you are too cute." Shun Yu remembered that when they were outside the palace, Shang Junlin liked the soft couch and liked to pull him along. Even when he was handling official business, he would let him sit next to him. It seemed that this was the reason. "If your Majesty wants me to sit closer, just say so. Why do you want to change this soft couch? Besides, a big couch has a big advantage. If you are tired, you can lie on it. What do you think, your Majesty? If you don't want to exchange, then so be it." Shang Junlin didn't have to exchange. Shun Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's body with her eyes half closed. After all, her body was damaged. Shun Yu was a little sleepy recently, so she fell asleep in a short while. Shang Junlin lowered his head and looked at the young man who had fallen asleep in his arms. His eyes became softer and softer. Shang Junlin took a blanket from the side and put it on the young man. He hugged the young man with one hand and held a brush with the other. It was a quiet afternoon with only the occasional sound of flipping through booklets. The spring quarter examination was just around the corner, and the students had all reduced their outings. They stayed in their temporary lodgings and focused on preparing for the examination. The closer it was to the exam, the more impatient Jiang Huiqing became. He knocked on the door of the room next door. "Brother Chengyu, are you busy?" After a while, the door opened, and a man in a navy blue robe appeared behind the door. "Come in." Jiang Huiqing walked in with his books. "I haven't seen young Master Lin and young Master Yu for a few days. Aren't they also going to participate in the spring quarter examination? Why haven't I seen them?" Jiang Huiqing placed his books beside He Chengyu. "Why are you looking for them?" He Chengyu poured a cup of tea for the two of them. "To get together. After the examination, we're all over the place. I don't know if we can still get together." Jiang Huiqing picked up the teacup and took a sip. "Good tea. If we pass the examination, we'll be able to see each other as officials in Dahuan." He Chengyu looked down at the tea leaves floating in the cup. The two of them were obviously people of high positions. It was unlikely that they were also examinees. Brother Cheng Yu is right. If fate wills it, we'll meet again. Let's not think about it anymore. I'm here today to ask Brother Cheng Yu for help. Jiang Huiqing opened his book and pointed at a few places. "Here, here, and here. I've thought about it for a few days, but I still don't understand." He Chengyu leaned closer to take a look and shared his opinion. The two of them discussed for a while. Jiang Huiqing suddenly understood. "So I was wrong. Huiqing's interpretation is quite novel. I wonder if it's convenient for me to ask who your teacher is." The two of them met on the way to the capital. One of them was from an aristocratic family, while the other was from a poor family. Unexpectedly, they had similar interests and decided to travel together after learning that their destination was the same. Jiang Huiqing was not guarded against people. It didn't take long for He Chengyu to figure out some basic information about Jiang Huiqing. In return for a favor, He Chengyu also told Jiang Huiqing about himself. The more they got to know each other, the more shocked He Chengyu was by Jiang Huiqing's knowledge. This was a young man who was not inferior to him. He knew his own situation. He was nurtured by the He family's resources. Jiang Huiqing was just an ordinary student from a poor family. The only person who could help Jiang Huiqing break through the barrier between a poor family and an aristocratic family was the person who taught him knowledge. "My teacher." Jiang Huiqing suddenly fell silent. He Chengyu saw that in that instant, Jiang Huiqing's aura had undergone an earth-shattering change. In just a moment, he had turned back into the person he was familiar with. "I'm just an ordinary old man. If I wasn't picked up by my teacher in the ice and snow, I might not be able to stand here now." He Chengyu did not expect that there was such a complicated story. He was stunned and said, "Sorry, I didn't know. It's okay." Jiang Huiqing waved his hand carelessly. "I didn't tell you this. Brother Chengyu, don't blame me for hiding it." His mood was disturbed. Jiang Huiqing picked up his books and said goodbye. He Chengyu watched him return to his room. He slowly lowered his gaze. He was too reckless today. Jiang Huiqing closed the door and sat on the bed. After a while, he rubbed his face. First, he had to pass the exam. Otherwise, he would not be able to do anything for his teacher. In order to give the students a good environment to prepare for the exam, the Yingxing Tower, which accepted many students, suspended all entertainment activities during this time. As the date approached, the streets were not as lively as before. The cold of spring had passed and the weather was gradually warming up. Shunyu was still wearing thick clothes and the room was warm every day. His personal servants, Mu Shi and eunuch Meng, had changed into lighter clothes. Shang Junlin was the same. Does your majesty feel that the room is too hot? Shunyu saw that Shang Junlin had changed into a light outer garment. The palace servants in the room were also wearing light clothes. He was the only one who was still wearing the thick winter robe. No, Shang Junlin put down his pen and reached out his hand. You, come here. Shunyu walked over and put his hand on the man's hand. After a moment of dizziness, he sat on the man's lap. Shang Junlin touched Shunyu's forehead. How do you feel? Are you cold? Shunyu nodded honestly, a little. Shunyu wouldn't have to suffer so much if it weren't for the second time. Shang Junlin put his arms around Shunyu's waist and held Shunyu's hands in his palms. The man's palms were very hot. As soon as Shunyu was held, he felt the warmth spread from his fingertips. Jun will warm you. Shang Junlin whispered in Shunyu's ear. Doesn't your majesty need to approve the memorials? Shunyu glanced at the pile of memorials on the short table. There's no hurry. Shang Junlin held Shunyu in his arms. The anger that rose from the memorials instantly subsided. They're all unimportant things. As he spoke, his warm breath sprayed on the side of his neck. Shunyu felt a little itchy. He touched Shang Junlin with his head. Your majesty, it's itchy. Shang Junlin moved his head a little. How about this? Shunyu's head didn't move. Shang Junlin laughed. Gui Jun, you can't be too close, but you can't be too far away. Shunyu would never admit that he was so difficult to please. Why can't I be too far away? Jun can't stand it if you're too far away, okay? Shang Junlin said helplessly. You're right, Shunyu muttered. He turned his head and said, Your Majesty seemed a little unhappy just now. What happened? It's about the invigilator and the examination before the examinees enter the venue. Shang Junlin attached great importance to every imperial examination. Some of these young examinees might be the future pillars of Da Heng. Da Heng urgently needed new blood. Which ministers did your majesty arrange to be in charge of this matter? Shunyu remembered the imperial examination fraud case in his previous life. He couldn't let the same thing happen again in this life. It's the Ministry of Rights. Zhang Yuan is in charge. Shang Junlin played with Shunyu's warm fingers. Zhang Yuan. Shunyu rummaged through his memories about this imperial examination. When the fraud case was exposed, it shocked the world. Shunyu even heard the news in King Yu's fief. He had a deep impression of this matter because of his trusted aide, Jiang Huiqing. Jiang Huiqing was innocently implicated. He escaped death several times and came to work under Shunyu a few years later. He only said a few words about what happened that year. Shunyu didn't have the interest to expose other people's scars, so he didn't ask in detail. As the chief examiner, Zhang Yuan was removed from his position and investigated on the day of the incident. Later, it was found that he wasn't involved in the fraud case. However, he was also accused of incompetent supervision. The furious Da Heng Emperor executed his entire family. It was also after this incident that Shang Junlin's ruthless reputation spread among the people. With the addition of one case after another, it became more and more deeply rooted in people's hearts. Later, when people mentioned Shang Junlin, the first thing that came to their minds wasn't his recovery of the country and the creation of a prosperous era, but his atrocious acts of killing people. Who assisted him? Too many officials were killed that year. Shunyu couldn't immediately determine who was the one who did it. There were several. Shang Junlin read a list of names. Why is Shunyu suddenly interested in this? I just want to know who made His Majesty unhappy. Since His Majesty is unhappy, he can just replace them. Does His Majesty lack them? Shang Junlin fiercely rubbed Shen Yu's face. It's really annoying that they keep quarreling. Yu is still the most considerate. Shen Yu couldn't directly intervene in this matter. If he wanted to deal with it in advance, he had to think of other ways. The next day, Shang Junlin made the final decision on the officials in charge of this imperial examination. This time, a new batch of officials was added. Shang Junlin's attitude was firm. Seeing that there was no room for negotiation, the officials quieted down. After telling Shen Yu the new arrangement, Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's hair. Yu, what are you worried about? Shen Yu shook his head. Shang Junlin was about to say something when Mu Shi came in with a letter. Young Master Jiang sent a letter. The person who delivered the letter said that the letter must be delivered to you as soon as possible. Why does he keep writing to Yu? Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's shoulder like a big dog. How is it always? Including this time, there are only 5. Shen Yu asked Mu Shi to bring the letter over. Mu Shi looked straight ahead and handed the letter over with both hands. Shang Junlin took the letter before Shen Yu. What does he say this time? Shen Yu took the letter from Shang Junlin. He didn't avoid him and opened the letter. The two of them read it together. The first part of the letter was similar to the previous times. At the end, the topic changed. It talked about a strange incident. Recently, someone came to him and mysteriously told him that there was a way for him to win first place in the examination. Chapter 57. Shen Yu's smile slowly disappeared. He did not know if something like this had happened in his previous life and Jiang Huiqing had been implicated. However, in this life, those people had already set their sights on Jiang Huiqing. Jiang Huiqing had written the letter in a joking tone. It was obvious that he did not take this matter seriously. Shen Yu turned to look at Shang Junlin. The man's face was terrifyingly dark. Your Majesty, I did not know that there were people who had the guts to do this. No wonder they fought so hard over the invigilation of the exam. Your Majesty, don't be angry. We are not sure if this matter is true or not. Let the hidden dragon guards investigate first. Shen Yu comforted. Investigate. We must investigate thoroughly. Send someone to Jiang Huiqing first. We might be able to catch them red-handed. Shen Yu turned around and faced Shang Junlin. Since they took action, they must not only have their eyes on Jiang Huiqing. We must send someone to keep an eye on the other students, especially those who are similar to Jiang Huiqing. Do as Yu says. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's wrist. His eyes were bloodthirsty and cold. I will write a letter back to Jiang Huiqing and ask him not to act rashly. Shen Yu pinched the letter. Other than you and me, I am not sure if anyone else has seen this letter. Shang Junlin thought for a while. We can rest assured. It depends on whether the person who delivered the letter to Jiang Huiqing is trustworthy. Don't worry too much. We are using another identity to communicate with Jiang Huiqing. Even if someone else saw this letter, they would not think that this letter would end up in our hands. Shen Yu said. That's right. It's all thanks to Yu this time. If it weren't for Yu and Jiang Huiqing's acquaintance, he wouldn't have told us about this. Perhaps we'll only know how daring these people are after the incident. Shang Junlin planted a kiss on Shen Yu's forehead. Yu is my lucky star. Seeing that Shang Junlin had calmed down, Shen Yu breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks to your Majesty for bringing me out of the palace. Actually, I feel that we should thank Prince Yu for this matter. Chen Yu deliberately adjusted the atmosphere. If it weren't for Prince Yu causing such a big commotion, we wouldn't have met Jiang Huiqing. If that's the case, I should thank Yu even more. If Yu hadn't suggested sending letters to all of King Yu's beauties, the Yingxing Tower incident wouldn't have happened. Thinking of this, Shang Junlin chuckled. That's right. Shen Yu's lips curled up. Everything was predestined. If any of them were missing, the outcome wouldn't have been achieved. After Shen Yu finished writing the letter, he first showed it to Shang Junlin. Then, he handed the letter to the hidden dragon guards and sent it to Jiang Huiqing. At this time, Jiang Huiqing was talking to He Chengyu. You don't know how interesting that person is. He stopped me and said that I was the chosen one. As long as I listened to him, it wouldn't be a problem for me to become the champion. Am I such a stupid person? Unless he's the emperor himself. Oh, no, even if it's the emperor himself, he can't influence the results of the exam. In order to ensure absolute fairness, the person marking the exam papers couldn't see the names and identities of the candidates. Only after marking the papers could they see the results. When did he find you? After hearing Jiang Huiqing's words, He Chungyu's expression became serious. Stunned by He Chungyu's attitude, Jiang Huiqing said hesitantly, "Isn't that person a liar?" He Chungyu saw that Jiang Huiqing didn't realize the problem and explained patiently, "Think about it. Why would a liar cheat at such a sensitive time? Since he dared to say it, he might have some connections." Jiang Huiqing was stunned. After a while, he widened his eyes in disbelief. You're saying that he asked me to cheat? Lower your voice." He Chungyu stood up and covered his mouth. "The walls have ears." Jiang Huiqing nodded and signaled that he wouldn't talk nonsense. He Chungyu then let go of him. "What should I do now?" Jiang Huiqing was stunned. If it was exposed, as someone who had interacted with that person, all his results would be cancelled. "Don't worry, I'll think of a way." He Chungyu looked down and thought about what the He family could use to solve this problem. He Chungyu knew how important this exam was to Jiang Huiqing. He also knew that with Jiang Huiqing's ability, he would definitely get a good result if there were no accidents. However, something like this happened. Jiang Huiqing stood up anxiously. "I also told young Master Yu about this. Will it bring him trouble?" Da Huan had always been strict about investigating fraud. After Shang Junlin took over, he had zero tolerance for fraud. If something really happened, he wouldn't be able to escape and young Master Yu would also be implicated. "I shouldn't have written the letter." "What did you say?" He Chungyu stood up abruptly. Jiang Huiqing was shocked and whispered, "I said I shouldn't have written the letter, not this sentence." He Chungyu interrupted him. "I said I wrote the letter and told young Master Yu about this. I don't know if young Master Yu and the others will be implicated." Jiang Huiqing didn't understand why He Chungyu's reaction was so big, but he still repeated what he just said. He Chungyu suddenly sighed in relief. "It's okay, they'll be fine." "Why?" Jiang Huiqing didn't understand. Because the identities of those two people were not simple. It was very likely that they were Her Majesty and Gui Jun themselves. He Chungyu answered in his heart. After the two sides met, He Chungyu used the He family's influence to investigate the capital. He couldn't find any information about those two people. It was as if they had appeared out of thin air. Combining the matters of Yingxing Tower and Sangqi Mountain, He Chungyu roughly came to a conclusion about those two people's identities. If it was as he thought, then everything that didn't make sense could be explained. Knock, knock. The sudden knocking on the door interrupted their thoughts. Jiang Huiqing stood up to open the door. There was an unfamiliar man standing at the door. Before he could ask, the man took out a letter and handed it to him. "Young Master Yu said that you will understand after you read it." It was a reply from young Master Yu. Jiang Huiqing was slightly relieved. He took the letter and walked back into the house. Young Master Yu replied so quickly. "Brother Chungyu, do you mind if I open it now?" He Chungyu shook his head. Jiang Huiqing opened the envelope and took out the letter. The more he read, the more serious his expression became. After a while, he kept the letter. Young Master Yu and Brother Chungyu said the same thing. They asked me to be careful during this period and not to alert the enemy. They also asked me to focus on preparing for the exam and not to worry about anything else. There will be professionals to take care of it. Since young Master Yu said so, just do as he said. That person must have found more than one person. We have to be careful during this period. I know. The next period of time was calm. Perhaps it was because Jiang Huiqing knew some things, but he felt that it was the calm before the storm. The hidden dragon guards secretly infiltrated the student activity areas and gradually locked on to a few targets. Shang Junlin received feedback from the hidden dragon guards every day. Things were progressing in an orderly manner. King Yu's men also started to take action. In the imperial court, A minister stood up and requested for the matter to be settled quickly. Your Majesty, no matter what, King Yu is still a noble. We cannot keep him locked up in the secret prison. King Yu's matter involved too many women. To protect the reputation of these women, his actions were not announced and he was locked up under another name. Furthermore, official Fang did not announce what he found out. Other than those who were well informed or whose daughters were involved, most of the people did not know what King Yu had done. Official Ma was one of those who spoke up. Some time ago, someone had given him a lot of benefits. As long as he mentioned it in the imperial court, regardless of the outcome, he would be rewarded handsomely. Official Ma thought that it was just a matter of saying a few words. He was an imperial censor and his job was to advise the emperor. It was not a big deal for him to say a few words for King Yu. Oh. Then what do you think I should do? Shang Junlin supported his chin with one hand and looked down at the ministers. This. Official Ma was at a loss for words. He did not dare to directly ask Shang Junlin to release King Yu. Your Majesty, have you forgotten the promise you made to the late emperor? An old minister stood up. Or did King Yu commit the crime of treason? The moment the old minister finished his words, the imperial court fell silent. Shang Junlin knocked on the armrest of the throne with an unreadable expression on his face. All of you also think that I should release King Yu? Some of the ministers who joined the imperial court later were confused. They looked at each other and did not dare to speak. A few of the ministers who were in the imperial court when the late emperor was still on the throne looked at each other and stood up. Your Majesty's words are of gold and jade. You should not change your words so easily. Even though Shang Junlin had expected this, he was still furious. Why did he value the imperial examination so much? It was to train new officials as soon as possible and replace these stubborn old officials. Shang Junlin glanced at the ministers one by one and stood up. All of you should know that I am in charge of Da Huan now. I have my own plans for King Yu. Ministers, you don't have to worry about it. Court is dismissed. With that, he flung his sleeves and left. The ministers looked at each other in confusion. What is going on? After a moment of silence, someone could not help but ask. Who knows what King Yu is thinking? Wouldn't it be better for him to leave peacefully? Why does he have to stay in the capital? His Majesty is really getting more and more disobedient. He has always been like that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have. The person who spoke suddenly stopped. Official Ma, why did you mention King Yu out of the blue? As if they had found an opportunity to attack, the ministers surrounded Official Ma. Official Ma wanted to cry but had no tears. He did not know that there would be such a big impact. Shang Junlin walked to the back of the hall and saw the young man standing by the window. He paused. The young man was wearing white clothes with a light blue gauze outer garment. His long hair was not tied up and was gently draped behind his back. He looked like an elegant young master. Why is Yu here? Shun Yu's range of activities in the palace was fixed in Yuzhang Palace. This was the first time Shang Junlin saw him come to the main hall of the court to find him. Hearing the sound, Shun Yu turned around. I came to see if His Majesty was bullied. Shun Yu came very early. He could hear the movements in the front of the hall from the back of the hall. He heard the ministers using the former emperor to pressure Shang Junlin. He also heard Shang Junlin's angry voice. However, he also knew that all of this was part of Shang Junlin's plan. He wanted to fish out the backup plan left by the former emperor for King Yu. When the beauty smiled, it was like a flower blooming in the clouds. Shang Junlin did not have the mind to think about the ministers. He walked quickly to Shun Yu's side. If I was bullied, what would you do? What does your Majesty want me to do? Go to the front of the hall and scold them? Shun Yu raised his eyebrows. No, how can Yu's mouth be used to scold people? Wouldn't it be too convenient for them? Shang Junlin leaned closer and said with a hidden meaning. Yu only needs to comfort me. Chapter 58. Shun Yu was speechless. Your Majesty, how do you want me to comfort you? What do you think, Yu? Shang Junlin moved closer to him. Shun Yu patted Shang Junlin's lowered head. All right. Your Majesty, don't be angry. These people are not worthy of your majesty's anger. After that, Shen Yu slowly withdrew his hand. Is this how you comfort me? Shang Junlin laughed involuntarily. You knows that's not what I mean. Shen Yu widened his eyes and revealed an innocent expression. If your majesty doesn't tell me, how would I know what kind of comfort your majesty wants? Keep pretending. The spring examination is about to end. Let's see what excuses you can use to fool me. Shang Junlin straightened his body and walked to the side with his hands behind his back. Your majesty, why are you so sure that you will win? Shen Yu still did not understand. Have you forgotten who determines the final results of the court examination? Shang Junlin looked at him with a smile. Shen Yu naturally knew this. He understood the meaning behind Shang Junlin's words and widened his eyes in disbelief. Your majesty, you won't abuse your power for personal gain in order to win, right? If I can make you take the initiative to approach me, what's wrong with abusing my power for personal gain? Shang Junlin raised his eyebrows. Shen Yu walked closer and carefully observed the man's expression. He found that he really didn't seem to be joking. It seemed that he really did think this way. Shen Yu suddenly felt speechless. Your majesty, do you really need to do this? Shen Yu walked around him. If you can't convince me, your majesty, don't expect me to be willing. Ha ha ha, I'm just kidding. Shang Junlin grabbed the young man walking beside him and picked him up. How can I be stupid in this matter? Yu is really worried. When the time comes, I'll ask someone to put down a curtain. You can read the papers with me. Caught off guard, Shen Yu was lifted up. He put his hands on the man's shoulders. Shang Junlin picked him up like a child. He was taller than Shang Junlin. Shen Yu looked down at the man. Your majesty, don't tell me this was your plan from the beginning. You want me to accompany your majesty to invigilate the examination? Shang Junlin patted Shen Yu's back and did not deny it. Does you want to go? I'll think about it. Shen Yu did not immediately refuse. Shang Junlin's tone just now did not sound like he was joking. If Jiang Huiqing and He Chungyu's results were not too different, Shang Junlin might really be biased and let He Chungyu become the top scorer. Anyway, it didn't matter who was first or second to him. Just based on this matter, Shang Junlin really had the constitution of a fatuous ruler. Shang Junlin could be a tyrant for his own reasons, but Shen Yu would never allow Shang Junlin to become a fatuous ruler because of him. It's not easy to come here. I'll take you around. Shang Junlin finished speaking and walked away. Shen Yu patted his shoulder. Put me down first. Shang Junlin thought for a moment. Shen Yu most likely did not want to walk around in his current position. He regretfully gave up the idea of carrying him and put Shen Yu down. When his feet touched the ground, Shen Yu slowly breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that Shang Junlin would carry him out regardless of anything. Before he could stand firm, an arm wrapped around his waist. Shen Yu lowered his head and looked at the arm firmly around his waist. He paused and did not say anything in the end. Do you want to go to the front hall to take a look? Although it was a question, Shang Junlin directly walked towards the front hall. Shen Yu cast a sidelong glance at him. Your Majesty has already made a decision. Why are you still asking me? After the court, the ministers left one after another. At this time, the front hall was completely empty. The main hall of Dahuan's court was called the Throne Hall. It was supported by 9 pillars with golden dragons circling around them. Except for the throne at the top, the rest of the hall was empty. During the court, the ministers would stand below. The emperor sat on the high seat and everything below could be seen at a glance. Under the guidance of Shang Junlin, Shen Yu walked into the main hall from the side door. Shen Yu was no stranger to this place. Before his rebirth, he was the most valued confidant of King Yu. He often followed him in and out of this place. Standing in the same place for 2 lifetimes, his state of mind had a completely different change. The man's strong arm supported him. A steady stream of warmth came from the other party's body. Shen Yu tilted his head and looked at the handsome side of the man's face. The man was wearing a black imperial robe embroidered with a lifelike 5-clawed golden dragon. With a golden edge, it showed the majesty of an emperor. Powerful, decisive, and in control of the life and death of the entire Dahuan. Such a man should be born to stand at the top. As an emperor, Shang Junlin was fully qualified. Shen Yu couldn't figure out, how did King Yu seize the throne from the hands of this person in his previous life? The more Shen Yu understood, the more he realized how powerful Shang Junlin was. He could fight his way out in such a harsh environment and climb to the throne. How could he be easily pulled down after sitting on the throne for decades? Unfortunately, the book he read after his death didn't mention this. Everything in his previous life couldn't be verified. Those secrets might be buried in the past forever. Only Shen Yu knew about the past. Noticing his gaze, Shang Junlin stopped. What's wrong? I'm just thinking about how it feels to sit on it every day. Shen Yu turned to look at the majestic dragon throne. You, just sit and you'll know. Seeing that Shen Yu was interested, Shang Junlin led him to the throne. Shen Yu stood at the bottom of the stairs and refused to move. I'm just curious. I don't need to experience it myself. You, don't worry. Is there any place in the palace that you can't go? Ignoring Shen Yu's protest, Shang Junlin picked up Shen Yu and walked up the stairs. Shen Yu silently nestled in Shang Junlin's arms. Finally, he couldn't hold back his curiosity and looked down. Every time he went up the stairs, his field of vision widened. After walking up the 9 steps, Shen Yu suddenly had the illusion that there was someone kneeling down below. Shang Junlin bent down and put Shen Yu on the dragon throne. He stood below and asked, You, how do you feel? Shen Yu was silent for a moment and answered honestly, I feel a little hard. The dragon throne was gorgeous, but it was also true that it was uncomfortable to sit on. The back of the throne was just a decoration. It was impossible to lean on it. Even if he leaned on it, he would only be scratched by the carved dragon. The armrests on both sides were wide and there was no place to lean on. Needless to say, there was no cushion for him to sit on. He could only sit up straight. It was fine for a while, but after a long time, Shen Yu felt that he couldn't stand it anymore. In this world, who doesn't want to sit on this throne? Only Yu would dislike it for being uncomfortable. Shang Junlin rolled up his sleeves and sat beside Shen Yu. The dragon throne was big enough for 2 people to sit on. Shang Junlin sat on it, and Shen Yu leaned on him. Even if everyone in the world wants to sit on this throne, no one is more suitable than your majesty. Eunuch Meng stood below. Only he knew how shocked he was. He knew that his majesty valued Shen Yu very much and almost spoiled him to the heavens. But he never expected that just because of Shen Yu's curiosity, he would personally put Shen Yu on that throne. Sitting on this throne, he felt not only the power, but also the responsibility of shouldering the entire Daheng country, as well as endless loneliness. Shen Yu sat for a while and couldn't sit still anymore. Shang Junlin didn't stop him this time, and the 2 walked down the stairs. Your Majesty, aren't you afraid that I will also have thoughts about that throne? Shen Yu was curious. Monstrous power was at hand. How many people could resist such a temptation? If Yu wants it, then what's the harm in giving it to Yu? Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's hair on the temples. But Yu, if you want the throne, you have to accept the throne. There can be no one else. The man's eyes darkened. Otherwise, if I can let Yu sit on that throne, I can also make it so that Yu will never be able to touch that throne. How can the throne be better than your majesty? It's better to let your majesty worry about the affairs of the world. I only want your majesty. Shen Yu looked up at Shang Junlin's eyes. The world is your majesty's, and your majesty is mine. He didn't know what his current feelings for Shang Junlin were, but he knew that he didn't want to change the current situation. Yu will always be mine. Shang Junlin held him in his arms with satisfaction. It wasn't the eye of the emperor, but the eye that represented Shang Junlin. The imperial examination in spring was approaching day by day. The old forces in the imperial court were becoming more and more unstable because of the matter of Prince Yu. They couldn't figure out Shang Junlin's attitude. Their probing seemed to anger the emperor, but it didn't achieve any of the effects they wanted. Releasing Prince Yu was both a goal and a pretense. It was a collision between the old and the new forces. Shang Junlin sat calmly and waited for the group of people who were buried the deepest to make a move. Several ministers gathered together in private to discuss the emperor's thoughts. What does His Majesty want to do this time? When have we ever guessed His Majesty's thoughts? In the past, His Majesty was very tolerant of the vassals. This time, I don't know why, but he made a move one after another. Does he not intend to care about the blood ties? You're wrong about this. When has His Majesty cared about these things? It's not like everyone doesn't know how His Majesty ascended the throne. Did you forget just because he didn't do anything in these years? So His Majesty really wants to kill Prince Yu this time? I heard some gossip here. Do you know the noble who has been very favored recently? Before she entered the palace, it was said that she and Prince Yu had a relationship. The person who spoke gave a you all know look. Based on how favored that person is, His Majesty can do anything to Prince Yu. The person who heard this gasped. So His Majesty is targeting Prince Yu on purpose? In an inconspicuous corner, someone quietly stood up and left. The person who spoke the truth quietly glanced over there and continued to speak. All kinds of things outside the palace didn't affect the inside. Shen Yu lived a leisurely life. He didn't need to drink the extremely bitter medicine anymore. His mood became more and more relaxed. Because of the previous incident, Jiang Huiqing wrote letters more frequently. Occasionally, there would be a few letters from He Chengyu. They were all about their recent discoveries. Shen Yu simply chose a hidden dragon guard to be in charge of this matter. With the cooperation of both sides, they had already found a lot of useful clues. As long as they found the mastermind, they could directly arrest him. Shen Yu turned over and half lay on Shang Junlin's chest. I hope this incident won't affect the exam. Shang Junlin hooked Shen Yu's hair. Those who have close contact with those people will be investigated thoroughly before deciding whether to participate in the exam. In fact, it will save a lot of effort if all of them are not allowed to enter the exam hall. Shen Yu looked down. Then won't a Yu definitely lose? Shang Junlin chuckled. Or does a Yu want to lose to me? I welcome him. Chapter 59. Shen Yu nudged Shang Junlin with his head. I'm talking to Her Majesty about serious matters. I know, Shang Junlin touched Shen Yu's forehead. We discovered it early this time, so it's not difficult to investigate. Those who participated in it will be disqualified. You, don't worry. I've already made adjustments to the questions this time, so there won't be any problems. Shang Junlin knew that someone wanted to tamper with the imperial examinations, so how could he sit still and wait for his death? He had already made adjustments to the questions that needed to be changed. In order to prevent the new questions from being leaked, those who participated in the revision of the questions had to live in the manner that he arranged for them. The manor was heavily guarded, so if they wanted to spread the news to the outside world, they would be exposed first. Shen Yu nodded and began to talk about what Jiang Huiqing and the others had discovered during this period of time. Jiang Huiqing wrote in the letter that those people had a clear goal. Most of them were from humble families. A few who were close to Jiang Huiqing were also targeted. After he told them about it, he found that a few of them were targeted. Shen Yu thought, they saw that Her Majesty likes to use officials from humble families, so they planned to use their own people first. Shang Junlin, no matter whether they succeed or not, these people will leave evidence that can be used against them. If they want to continue their official career, they can only work for the person behind the scenes. Shen Yu, that's right. And the higher those people go in the future, the more beneficial it will be for the person behind the scenes. It's such a good deal. They can effortlessly turn these people into their own people. But Shen Yu looked down to hide the coldness in his eyes. Whether it was in his previous life or this time, that person's goal would not succeed. Yingxing Tower. As the exam day approached, the number of people in the building decreased. The students stayed in their own places and made their final preparations. Jiang Huiqing's impetuous heart gradually calmed down. After talking with young Master Yu, he roughly knew that young Master Lin and young Master Yu's background was not simple. They were most likely not the candidates this time. Brother Chengyu is as calm as ever. Jiang Huiqing walked over from the window. Having known He Chengyu for so long, Jiang Huiqing had never seen He Chengyu's expression change. The surrounding students were getting more and more nervous. Only He Chengyu remained the same. Even he himself had been anxious some time ago, but his state of mind had only slowly recovered in the past 2 days. It's just an exam. Didn't Huiqing perform as usual? He Chengyu smiled faintly. Jiang Huiqing patted his chest and said, although I don't show it on my face, what happened a while ago really scared me. I've been feeling uneasy for a few days now. I don't know if Brother Chengyu has noticed, but those people's targets seem to be poor students. After these days of observation, Jiang Huiqing came to this conclusion. He Chengyu nodded. Yes, I did. I've asked the students from the other clans, but they haven't encountered anything similar. It seems that their goal is very clear. Jiang Huiqing rubbed his chin. They're picking people according to His Majesty's preferences. When the previous emperor was on the throne, the poor were suppressed by the aristocratic families to the point that they almost had no place to stand. After the current emperor ascended the throne, a group of poor officials were slowly raised. The exam is about to start. I don't know if this matter can be completely resolved before it starts. Under everyone's anticipation, the day of the exam finally arrived. In the morning, the students brought their tools. After checking that there were no mistakes, they entered the exam room one by one. Everyone's attention was on the exam itself. No one noticed that a small number of students were quietly taken away before they entered the exam room. After the students entered the exam room, a well-prepared arrest operation was secretly carried out. The evidence was conclusive. Without giving anyone any chance to resist, several inconspicuous people were quietly taken away. As the weather warmed up, the flowers in the garden bloomed, especially in Yuzhong Palace. Knowing that Shun Yu liked flowers and plants, Shang Junlin sent people to bring over many rare flowers and plants. Recently, a top-quality ink orchid was presented. Shang Junlin didn't even think and had people send it to Yuzhong Palace. Eunuch Meng personally led people to move it. He finally understood that if there was something good, it should be directly sent to Yuzhong Palace. Didn't he see that His Majesty was only staying overnight in Yuzhong Palace? Since Shun Yu entered the palace, Shang Junlin almost never returned to the emperor's bedroom. Even Eunuch Meng had a room to rest in Yuzhong Palace. His Majesty specially sent this slave to send this. See if you like it. Eunuch Meng lifted the red silk covering the top. Layers of blooming petals came into view. Shun Yu's eyes lit up. Where did His Majesty get such a top-quality ink orchid? It was sent by the servants. It just arrived in the palace today. His Majesty sent this slave to send it to you. His Majesty is considerate. Shun Yu found a suitable place for the ink orchid to grow and asked the palace servants to move the ink orchid there. Eunuch Meng was ready to leave after sending the things. Shun Yu stopped him. I wonder if Eunuch Meng can change the head eunuch of Yuzhong Palace? Eunuch Meng paused. Why does His Majesty suddenly want to change people? The palace servants of Yuzhong Palace were all arranged by Shang Junlin. At that time, Shun Yu had just entered the palace. Shang Junlin's requirement was that people with clean backgrounds should not cause trouble. Eunuch Meng also let his subordinates do the selection. Later, Shun Yu was favored, and countless people regretted not being able to work in Yuzhong Palace. Eunuch Meng also regretted it. If he knew that Yuzhong Palace could be so popular because of Shun Yu, he would have arranged a position for his people. However, the matter was a foregone conclusion. It was useless to regret it. Shun Yu had never asked about the palace servants. Suddenly, he said that he wanted to change people. First, pick a group of people according to my requirements. After all, if you want to live for a long time, the people you use naturally need to be handy. Shun Yu stated his requirements. Loyal, not gossiping, adaptable, understanding, and easy to use. As for the rest, I will have to trouble Eunuch Meng to put more effort into it. His Majesty is too kind. His Majesty can rest assured that this slave will do well for His Majesty. Eunuch Meng respectfully responded. Those who could serve in front of the emperor were all experienced people. Eunuch Meng could tell that the previous head eunuch had made His Majesty unhappy. Eunuch Meng couldn't figure it out. His Majesty was already a rare master who was easy to serve. What did the head eunuch of Yuzhong Palace do to make His Majesty want to change people? And, when His Majesty said that he wanted to live for a long time, Did he mean that he didn't plan to live for a long time, so everything was dispensable? Eunuch Meng lowered his eyes to hide the deep thought in his eyes. He began to think about the candidates that met Shen Yu's requirements. Ian, I'm very relieved when you do things. After explaining, Shen Yu didn't intend to care about this matter. Eunuch Meng returned to Shang Junlin to report. After he finished talking about Shen Yu's reaction, he hesitated for a while and then told him that Shen Yu wanted to change people. Shang Junlin thought about the head eunuch of Yuzhang Palace. He didn't have much of an impression. When he was in Yuzhang Palace, Eunuch Meng had always been the one who served him. Shen Yu didn't like people to serve him. Other than Mu Shi, there were few other palace servants who served him. Did His Majesty say the reason? From what Shang Junlin knew about Shen Yu, he wasn't a person who spoke with a goal in mind. No, Eunuch Meng shook his head. He only said that he didn't like to use him. Shang Junlin, go investigate that head eunuch. If His Majesty wants to change people, then let him do it. This time, choose the people carefully. Eunuch Meng, this slave understands. Shang Junlin, after you choose the people, let me have a look first. Don't find someone who will make His Majesty worry. Eunuch Meng, yes. Shen Yu watered Mo Lan with some water and put down his rolled-up sleeves. He saw Shang Junlin walk in. Your Majesty, are you done with your work? Ien, Shang Junlin took a handkerchief from the side and wiped Shen Yu's hands. Why don't you let the servants do these things? Of course, the flowers sent by Your Majesty have to be taken care of. Otherwise, what if Your Majesty doesn't like Junling one day? Junling was sent by Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Because it was difficult to take care of, Shen Yu had always taken care of it personally. Shang Junlin had been jealous of it several times. You even know how to tease me. Shang Junlin poked Shen Yu's forehead. Shen Yu dodged to the side. Your Majesty, why don't you let others talk about what you did? Okay, you can say whatever you want. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and led him to the soft couch to sit down. Why do you suddenly want to change people to serve you? Eunuch Meng has announced to Your Majesty. Shen Yu was not surprised that Eunuch Meng would tell Shang Junlin about this matter. He told Eunuch Meng because he had the intention of using Eunuch Meng to tell Shang Junlin about this matter. Shen Yu, it's not like you don't know how much I care about your matters. How would Meng Chang dare to hide it? It was Mu Shi who found out. He took advantage of his position as the eunuch in charge of Yuzhang Palace and bullied the palace maids in the palace. He didn't dare to touch the people in Yuzhang Palace, so he touched the people in other palaces. Shen Yu's face was full of disgust. I have already asked Mu Shi to make a list of the palace maids who were bullied. If it wasn't for a palace maid who had a strong temper and made a fuss, who knows how long this matter would have been hidden. Shang Junlin's aura became heavy. Who gave him the courage to run amok? Maybe it's because Your Majesty usually doesn't care about the palace maid's matters, so he thinks he can be unscrupulous because he is the eunuch in charge of Yuzhang Palace. When Shen Yu first found out, he almost killed him directly. It was Mu Shi who stopped him. Young master, this kind of thing is actually not uncommon in the palace. This time, Eunuch Li was dealt with. Next time, there will be Eunuch Zhao and Eunuch Sunday. We must put an end to this phenomenon. We must make them not dare to do it even if they want to, Mu Shi said. The more beautiful the surface, the easier it was to hide filth. When the water was too clear, there would be no fish. Shen Yu was not a young master who lived in a castle in the sky. He had seen the dark side of the world many times. He knew that in the palace, which was the center of power in Dahuan, no matter how shocking it was not surprising. Let Meng Chang deal with it. Shen Yu reached out and pressed his hand against Shang Junlin's lips. No, since it's a crime committed by someone from Yuzhang Palace, I should be the one to deal with this matter. To dare do such a thing under my nose, I want to see who gave him the guts. For the first time, Shen Yu showed such a fierce side in front of Shang Junlin. The beauty's temperament was like ice, and there was a biting chill between his eyebrows. Shang Junlin looked at him quietly and felt his heart beating faster and faster. Usually, Shen Yu was gentle and harmless. Occasionally, he would show his small fangs. He did not look like a predator, but more like a cub that had not grown up yet. He was less intimidating. But now, Shen Yu was different. A dangerous aura seeped out from inside, with a breathtaking beauty. At a certain moment, Shang Junlin felt that this was the real Shen Yu. Full of aggression, danger, and charm. He almost could not move his eyes away. Seeing that Shang Junlin did not respond for a long time, Shen Yu looked up in confusion. Your Majesty, what are you thinking about? I'm thinking. You is so beautiful. His voice was as low as a whisper. He wanted to pull her into his arms and kiss her fiercely, marking her as his from the inside out. Chapter 60. Feeling Shang Junlin's strong aggressive aura, Shen Yu held his breath. He was even a little confused. Did he say something? How did he suddenly make Shang Junlin so interested? After thinking about it, Shen Yu stepped back a little. No matter what the reason was, it was better for him to stay away from Shang Junlin, who was emitting a dangerous aura. Sensing his small movements, Shang Junlin blocked his way with one hand behind him. Why are you hiding? Shen Yu played dumb. What did your Majesty say? Shang Junlin didn't want to make things difficult for him, so he restrained his aura. What does you plan to do? It was unknown when Shang Junlin changed the way he addressed Shen Yu from Guijun to you. Shen Yu gradually got used to it. Change the eunuch in charge of Yuzhong Palace first, then we'll talk. We'll do as you says. I'll choose the newcomer first. I won't allow the same thing to happen a second time. This time, the eunuch in charge of Yuzhong Palace got into trouble. In the end, it was his fault for not paying attention to him. If he had carefully checked the eunuch before appointing him, the current situation wouldn't have happened. Thank you, Your Majesty. Shen Yu narrowed his eyes. He always knew that a dike of 1,000 miles could collapse because of an ant's nest. He didn't expect the people who worked under him to be flawless, but he couldn't tolerate people who had no bottom line. Since he was going to do it, Shen Yu ordered Mu Shi to check all the people in Yuzhong Palace. In the past, he didn't think that he would live in Yuzhong Palace for a long time. He didn't have high requirements for the palace servants who served him, and he wouldn't send them to do anything urgent. Usually, he was easy to talk to, which encouraged some people's ambitions. Shen Yu was favored, so Yuzhong Palace also rose. The palace servants who served in Yuzhong Palace were much more prestigious than those in other places. The rules of survival in the palace had always been like this. Shen Yu didn't plan to change anything, but he didn't want to see someone use his name to make trouble. Eunuch Meng quickly selected a candidate and immediately showed it to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin's gaze swept across the name list one by one. When he saw a certain name, he paused and looked up with a faint smile. If I remember correctly, this Meng Yuan is your godson, right? Yes. Eunuch Meng didn't dare to lie. This servant found these people according to your request. This servant has seen Meng Yuan since he was young. This servant knows his character better than anyone else. This servant boldly added his name to the list. After he finished speaking, Eunuch Meng was a little nervous and added, I added Meng Yuan's name because I had selfish motives. Firstly, I know his background. Secondly, Your Highness is a master who is easy to serve. It is Meng Yuan's fortune to be able to serve Your Highness. Shang Junlin stroked the edge of the name list with uncertainty in his eyes. Eunuch Meng's heart jumped even higher. He smiled bitterly in his heart. He really didn't want to let go of this opportunity, so he boldly indulged his selfish motives. This servant knows that you value this godson very much. However, you can't go too far. This servant has looked at the name list. They all meet Your Highness's requirements. Send them to Your Highness. As for who can stay, it will be up to Your Highness. Shang Junlin glanced at Eunuch Meng lightly and threw the name list into his arms. This servant thanks Your Majesty for your grace. Eunuch Meng hugged the scroll. The big stone in his heart finally fell to the ground. Go. Shang Junlin waved his hand. Yes. Eunuch Meng hugged the scroll, bowed, and left. Eunuch Meng didn't dare to delay. He brought the selected people to Yuzhong Palace. Shen Yu was taking care of the molan that Shang Junlin sent. He didn't know how he took care of this flower. Even though the flowering period was over, it still bloomed very well. Young master, Eunuch Meng has brought people here. She stepped forward to clean Shen Yu's hands. So soon? Shen Yu cleaned his hands and took a handkerchief to dry them. Send people to the main hall. She received the order and left. Shen Yu changed his outer robe and went out. When Shen Yu arrived, Eunuch Meng was already waiting in the main hall with people. Shen Yu walked to the main seat and sat down. Eunuch Meng introduced the people that he brought to Shen Yu one by one. Eunuch Meng, thank you for your trouble. Eunuch Meng smiled kindly. Your Highness is too kind. Please take a look and see if there are any satisfactory candidates. If none of them are suitable, this servant will bring another batch. No need to be so troublesome. These people already meet my requirements. Shen Yu pointed at a few people. These people will stay first. The rest of you can leave. The other people bowed and respectfully left. Meng Yuan was among the people that Shen Yu left. Eunuch Meng's smile deepened. Shen Yu tested the remaining people and finally kept Meng Yuan. Later, Shang Junlin came over. Why did you choose Meng Yuan? Shang Junlin hugged Shen Yu and walked to the side of the couch to sit down. Does you know the relationship between Meng Yuan and Meng Chang? Shen Yu shook his head. What's the relationship between them? I chose Meng Yuan because I like his style of doing things. Yuzhang Palace is too eye-catching. The people under it must be managed by someone reliable. That's Meng Chang's godson. He's very scheming. He knew that Yuzhang Palace was a good place to go, so he sent his godson here. Eunuch Meng really has good taste. Shen Yu leaned on the man's shoulder. It seems that Her Majesty really likes me. Even the favorite of the emperor thinks that working in my palace is promising. Shang Junlin thought that Shen Yu would be dissatisfied. He didn't expect him to have such a reaction. Zhen thought you would be angry. What's there to be angry about? Shen Yu smiled. Her Majesty saw the person first. If there was a problem, Her Majesty wouldn't send the person to me, right? A Yu's mouth is better than anyone else. Shang Junlin pinched Shen Yu's chin and turned it to face him. His thumb rubbed Shen Yu's lips. Shen Yu blinked. I'm just telling the truth. Why is Her Majesty looking at me like this? Zhen is thinking, did you have a candidate in mind from the beginning? Did you go around in a big circle just to let Meng Yuan take the initiative to come to Yuzhang Palace? Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. It wasn't hard to guess. Otherwise, as a noble, Shen Yu could have any eunuch he wanted. He went around in such a big circle. It was just that the person's identity was different, so it wasn't easy to mention it. Shen Yu pretended to be confused. He blinked innocently. What are you talking about, Your Majesty? Little fox. Shang Junlin leaned closer and kissed the young man's eyes. Shen Yu was startled by the sudden breath. He didn't have time to react before he felt a warm touch on his eyes. The warm touch fell on his eyelids. The words he didn't have time to say were completely forgotten. Looking at Shen Yu's dazed expression, Shang Junlin's eyes became deeper and deeper. His lips gradually moved down. The moment his lips were about to touch, Eunuch Meng's voice sounded from outside the screen. Her Majesty, Fang Daren requests an audience. As if waking up from a dream, Shen Yu suddenly broke free and said uncomfortably, since Your Majesty has something to do, you can go and do it first. Shang Junlin secretly sighed that he missed a good opportunity. He rubbed Shen Yu's head and got up to leave. Shen Yu sat on the soft couch for a while. The confusion in his eyes gradually faded. Candidates were not allowed to leave the examination hall during the examination period. They ate and lived in the examination hall. They didn't know that in just a few days, the outside world was in chaos. Shang Junlin's people finally found clues and caught the mastermind behind the scenes. In the imperial court, Fang Daren reported what he found in a deep voice. Finally, he bowed deeply. Your Majesty, please make a decision. There was an uproar. How is this possible? This is a matter that shakes the foundation of the country. Could Fang Daren be mistaken? Fang Daren glared at him. Do you think I would joke about this? I didn't mean that. The person who spoke shut his mouth embarrassedly. The evidence is conclusive. Your Majesty, please punish him severely. Looking at the righteous Fang Daren, The ministers felt as if they had returned to the day when Censor Zhong was implicated. Amidst the whispers, Shang Junlin's cold voice sounded. Ministers, please take a look at Fang Daren's evidence before you speak. The eunuch in front of the imperial court held up the scroll and read it aloud. From how to get the exam questions to how to order people to get close to the students and lure them into the trap, everything was explained clearly. After a moment of silence, Shang Junlin slowly opened his mouth. Does the Grand Commandant have anything to say to defend yourself? The Grand Commandant couldn't argue with the evidence. He knelt down dejectedly. I know my mistake. The Grand Commandant was an old minister from the previous dynasty. He didn't suffer any losses during the change of power because he chose sides in time. On the contrary, when Shang Junlin ascended the throne, he became an important minister and was active until now. Shang Junlin stood up from the dragon throne and looked down emotionlessly. Grand Commandant, don't be in a hurry to admit your guilt. Tell me, what benefits did the previous emperor give you that you are still willing to work for him after more than 10 years? I wouldn't dare. The Grand Commandant's heart skipped a beat. Why wouldn't you dare? Do you regret that you didn't kill me on the battlefield so that King Yu could take the throne? Shang Junlin's words caused an uproar. No one would have thought that an attempted cheating case would involve the secrets of the past. Not long after Shang Junlin ascended the throne, he was seriously injured in a battle. However, before he recovered, the news was kept secret. Not many people knew about it, and even fewer people knew about it. Your Majesty, I am innocent. I was possessed and tampered with the imperial examinations. However, I really didn't do what Your Majesty said. The Grand Commandant was shocked. The first incident was enough to convict his entire family. If the second incident was added, what's more, he only wanted to gain a foothold in the imperial court. He didn't have the intention nor the ability to break through the heavy guards and attack Shang Junlin. Looking at the Grand Commandant who was trembling like a leaf, Shang Junlin's mouth faintly curved up. Of course, he knew that the Grand Commandant didn't do it. He deliberately said it so that he could pass the information to someone through the spies in the imperial court. He knew that what happened that year wasn't an accident, and he would investigate it thoroughly. The Grand Commandant was taken away with a pale face. After the court was dismissed, only Lord Fang stayed. The two talked in the imperial study for the whole afternoon. After Lord Fang left, the Supreme Court began to deal with the Grand Commandant's case. Shun Yu leaned against Shang Junlin's chest through his clothes. So, Your Majesty was lying to me last time? This injury wasn't left when you were young. It's my fault. Shang Junlin smiled bitterly. He told Shun Yu about what happened in the imperial court today. He didn't expect Shun Yu to focus on this. Someone actually attacked Your Majesty after you ascended the throne? Shun Yu thought for a while and felt that it wasn't strange. Whether it was in the previous life or this life, King Yu had always been eyeing the throne. Originally, Shun Yu thought that King Yu was the only one who coveted the throne. Now, it seemed that it was far from the case. Other than those who coveted the throne on the surface, there were many people who secretly coveted it. It was just that they didn't dare to show it because of Shang Junlin's power. Shun Yu pressed the wound according to his memory. Your Majesty, does it hurt? Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand on his chest. Yu, does your heart ache? Chapter 61. If I don't care about Your Majesty, who will care about you? Your Majesty, please don't get hurt again. Shun Yu's eyes drooped slightly. Shang Junlin was envious. He held Shun Yu's chin with one hand and slowly approached him. A soft kiss fell on the corner of his eyes. It had the scent of a man, strong, steady, and reliable. Shang Junlin liked to kiss Shun Yu's eyes recently, especially when he looked at Shang Junlin. The concentration and color in his eyes made Shang Junlin unable to let go. Shun Yu's eyelids drooped. His long eyelashes gently swept across the man's lips, making him feel a little itchy. Shang Junlin released Shun Yu's hand from his hand and wrapped it around his waist. He tightened his arms and pulled Shun Yu closer to him. Shun Yu let him kiss him for a while and said, "It's time to close the net about Prince Yu. Only one Grand Commandant was fished out, but it's enough. If there's one, There will be a second, a third. That's not necessarily true. Shun Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's chest and looked at him. Your Majesty, why did the Grand Commandant tamper with the imperial examination? Yu wants to blame Prince Yu for what the Grand Commandant did. Shang Junlin thought for a while and reacted. Otherwise, why would the Grand Commandant bribe a poor student who hasn't entered the imperial court yet? What if it was Prince Yu's idea? Prince Yu lives in his fief all year round. What made him want to plant his own people in the imperial court? Shun Yu chuckled. It doesn't matter if it was true or not, as long as we spread the news and let those people think so. Shang Junlin couldn't directly do anything to Prince Yu because of the late emperor's will. But what if Prince Yu crossed the line himself? Prince Yu didn't know that he was sitting in prison, but the pot came from the sky. With the emperor's personal order, the Supreme Court didn't dare to delay. They rushed to the end of the examination before it ended. The students heard such shocking news as soon as they came out of the examination hall. They forced themselves to gather together and wondered if they would be implicated. This was especially true for some of the people who had been found. Their faces turned pale, and they panicked, not knowing what to do. It was only after Shang Junlin had instructed the officials in advance to pacify the students that they were allowed to go back and rest. Jiang Huiqing had learned about what had happened in advance, and Shun Yu had also told him that the matter would be resolved after they left the examination hall. Jiang Huiqing found it unbelievable, but he didn't expect to hear the news as soon as he left the examination hall. After a good rest and replenishing his energy, Jiang Huiqing called He Chengyu to the hall for dinner. It wasn't easy to finish the exam, so it should be lively. To celebrate the end of the exam, Yingxing Tower held a free banquet to reward the students who worked hard. Everyone knew that this was a tradition of Yingxing Tower over the years, so no one refused. The hall was bustling with noise and excitement. Students who had just finished their exams gathered in groups of 3 to 5 to chat. As they chatted, they inevitably talked about the major events that had happened recently. I really didn't expect such a big thing to happen this year. Yes, it's fortunate that His Majesty had foresight and discovered that something was wrong. Otherwise, how could we possibly gather together and chat so comfortably? That's right, that's right. In the history of the Great Huan dynasty, whenever there was a case of cheating, the results of that year would all be nullified. If it weren't for His Majesty's brilliance, we would have wasted another 3 years. A blue-clothed youth sitting in a quiet corner smiled and said, after this incident, this year's students will only respect His Majesty more. What do you think, Alin? The black-clothed man placed the deboned fish into Shun Yu's bowl. Didn't Yu say that he wanted to meet Jiang Huiqing? Aren't you going? There's no hurry. I've already communicated with him. He'll come and find us when he sees us. Shun Yu stayed in the palace for a few days. After confirming that the matter of the Grand Commandant was irreversible, and that he had really rewritten Jiang Huiqing's fate, he wanted to leave the palace to meet him. Coincidentally, Shang Junlin also had matters to attend to. The two of them changed into the same attire they had worn the last time they left the palace and went to the Yingxing Tower. This time, they didn't ask for a private room. Instead, they chose the main hall. Shun Yu wanted to experience the liveliness of the Yingxing Tower after the examination. The busiest time should be the day when the results are released. Yu, do you want to leave the palace on that day to take a look? Shun Yu hurriedly nodded. Yes. If Yu performs well, I'll bring you out. Shun Yu didn't understand what he meant by performing well. Suddenly, he realized something. Aren't we going to wait for the court examination to end? Brother Lin, Brother Yu. Jiang Huiqing saw the two people sitting by the window the moment he came downstairs. He pulled He Chengyu over. I was quite surprised that Brother Yu said you wanted to come. What's there to be surprised about? We've known each other for a while. On such an important day, we naturally have to get together. Shun Yu said. After a period of correspondence, Jiang Huiqing and Shun Yu had become more familiar with each other. He sat across from the two of them. I was worried that Brother Lin and Brother Yu would be busy. He Chengyu called over the waiter who was waiting by the side and added some dishes. Thank you for your help with the matter of Huiqing. Shun Yu smiled and replied, there's no need to be so polite between friends. The two of them sat down and talked about the recent events. Jiang Huiqing sighed. This time, it's all thanks to Her Majesty. Otherwise, it's hard to say if I would have been able to take the examination normally. Huiqing is very knowledgeable. It's a loss that you can't serve the court. You flatter me. It was the first time Jiang Huiqing had been praised like this. He lowered his head in embarrassment. Let's not talk about this. To thank you for your help during this period of time, let me toast you too. After saying this, Jiang Huiqing picked up the wine cup and drank it in one gulp. Shun Yu was ordered to abstain from drinking. Shang Junlin returned a cup. You can't drink. I'll drink on his behalf. I didn't think it through. I'm sorry. Jiang Huiqing said apologetically. It's okay. In fact, I also want to drink, but Lin is watching over me. The more he didn't let him drink, the more Shun Yu's heart itched. Shang Junlin was still very quiet throughout the meal. It seemed that all his attention was on how to take care of Shun Yu. Jiang Huiqing watched him pick food for Shun Yu, pick out fish bones, and occasionally whisper a few words to him. He deeply felt that he shouldn't be here. After the meal, they chatted for a while. Shang Junlin still had something to do, so Shun Yu proposed to leave. Is you going back to the palace or coming with me? Shang Junlin asked while playing with Shun Yu's fingers in the carriage. Shun Yu asked, Where is your Majesty going? Shang Junlin answered, The Supreme Court. Shun Yu asked, Is it because of the military officer? Shang Junlin answered, Yes. Shun Yu said, I'll go with your Majesty. I don't want to go back to the palace alone. Shang Junlin ordered and the carriage turned to the Supreme Court. The Minister of the Supreme Court had received the news early and personally led the carriage into the inner courtyard. Shang Junlin got off the carriage. The Minister of the Supreme Court was about to go forward when he saw a man in black standing beside the carriage and stretching out a hand. The Minister of the Supreme Court was stunned. Who else was inside? At the same time, he couldn't help but be curious. What kind of identity could make His Majesty personally welcome him down the carriage? Soon, the answer was revealed. A white hand stretched out from the carriage curtain and put on the hand of the man in black. The curtain opened and a young man in blue stepped out. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand. If Shun Yu hadn't stopped him with his eyes, he would have directly carried her down. Seeing the intimate action of the two, the Minister of the Supreme Court was shocked and hurriedly knelt down to salute. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. No need to be so polite. Shang Junlin raised his hand and motioned for him to stand up. Just take us there. Yes. The Minister of the Supreme Court didn't dare to ask more and led the way in front with trembling hands. Standing in front of a dark red door, the Minister of the Supreme Court bowed his head. Your Majesty, the files are inside. No need to let anyone follow. Yes, the Minister of the Supreme Court hesitated for a moment and said, Your Majesty, don't worry, I won't go in. Shang Junlin narrowed his eyes unhappily. Shun Yu poked his arm. I don't want to see those scholarly things. I'll just wait for Your Majesty outside. It just so happens that I haven't been here before. Shun Yu turned his head and looked at the Minister of the Supreme Court. Can I stroll around here? The Minister of the Supreme Court was grateful for Shun Yu's help and hurriedly replied, Of course you can. Shang Junlin still wanted to say something, but Shun Yu interrupted him. Your Majesty, please spare me. I can read the books, but not these. Seeing that he really didn't want to go in, Shang Junlin dispelled the idea and pinched his face. Be good and wait for me outside. Don't run around. After Shang Junlin went in, Shun Yu strolled around the courtyard. The Minister of the Supreme Court didn't dare to go too far or too close and followed him from a distance. The sun was setting in the west. Shun Yu finished looking at all the flowers and plants in the courtyard and Shang Junlin came out. On the way back, Shun Yu couldn't help but be curious and asked, Your Majesty, what do you want to see? You can just send someone to get the files. Why do you have to go there yourself? There are some things that are uncertain. It's troublesome to let them do it. Since you are going out of the palace, I might as well go there myself, Shang Junlin explained. After returning to the palace, Mu Shi reported the results of the investigation to Shun Yu. There are no less than 20 palace maids who are victims. They are all not very eye-catching in the palace. Moreover, thinking of the truth, She was so angry that her eyes turned red, and there are two who are under 15 years old. What about those palace maids? With a catcher sound, Yu broke the plum blossom branch in his hand. This servant found an empty courtyard in Yuzhong Palace to settle them down. Yu turned around. Take me to see them. Passing through the flower path, Shi took Yu to a remote courtyard. Shi pushed the door and went in. When they saw Yu, the palace maids in the room couldn't help but tremble. This is Gui Jun, the person who will uphold justice for you. Don't be afraid. Shi was obviously very familiar with their situation and comforted them in a soft voice. Several palace maids bowed in fear and their movements were slightly sluggish. No need to be so polite. Yu didn't let them bow. Since the people in my palace hurt you, I will definitely seek justice for you. Thank you, Gui Jun. Hearing Yu's promise, the eyes of several wooden palace maids finally brightened. If you have anything to say, just tell Shi. Yu said a few words and left with Shi. On the way, Yu asked, "Did you find an imperial physician for them?" Shi shook her head. This servant knows that the situation is not very good, but they refused to let this servant find an imperial physician. Yu noted down this matter. Later, he mentioned it to Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, is there a female physician in the palace? Shang Junlin, there should be. I will let Meng Chang arrange it. Why do you need a female physician? Yu, I have some injured women in the palace. It is more convenient to let a female physician take a look at them. Shang Junlin, is it those palace maids? Yes. Yu lowered his voice. I went to see them today. It was my negligence. I will think of a way to make up for it later. How can this matter be blamed on you? Shang Junlin held Yu's hand on his knee. You have done very well. In the palace, people's lives are as light as grass. How many people can be like a you, willing to stand up for palace maids who they don't know? Strong, gentle, dangerous. He loved every aspect of her to the bone. Chapter 62. I just happened to run into him and the one who hurt him is someone from my palace. Yu lowered his eyes and hid the coldness in his eyes. It's better to deal with this kind of scum. We'll do as a Yu says. Shang Junlin stroked the hair on the young man's forehead. Since I said you can deal with this matter by yourself, I won't interfere. Your Majesty, how's the matter with Grand Commandant going? Yu had already made a decision and changed the topic. He can't stand the interrogation. Grand Commandant has confessed that it was King Yu who ordered him to do it. Yu raised his head and looked at Shang Junlin. He smiled and said, King Yu must have never thought that a prison would bring him such a big surprise. In a few days, someone will inadvertently reveal the news to him. At that time, he will only be more anxious to get out. After all, he was in prison and could only be at the mercy of others. King Yu waited anxiously for a few days but didn't receive the order from Shang Junlin to let him out. Instead, when a jailer leaked the news, he heard that he had ordered Grand Commandant to create a fraud case. What did you say? King Yu clenched his hands and widened his eyes in disbelief. This. Knowing that he had leaked the news, the jailer's face turned pale. His superiors had specially ordered him not to let King Yu know any news from the outside world. Why would anyone believe such a ridiculous rumor? I ordered Grand Commandant. How can I order him? King Yu thought it was ridiculous at first, but when he thought deeper, his face became more and more ugly. It was true that he had many small tricks, but this was the only thing he didn't do. How could he let Shang Junlin have such a big handle on him before his big plan was completed? He did it on purpose. King Yu's fingertips turned white. He deliberately put the blame on me so that he can ignore Father's will and attack me unscrupulously. I want to see His Majesty. I didn't do it. I won't admit it. King Yu made a scene in the prison. The jailer had no choice but to report the news. King Yu must have made up his mind to go on a hunger strike and self-harm. Shang Junlin put down the secret report with a cold look in his eyes. Yu walked over, picked it up, and glanced at it. It's not strange. He knows that His Majesty will not let him die in prison without a clear reason. If he fights with his life on the line, He might be able to fight for a way out. If he sits and waits for death, he will be finished. Rumors spread like wildfire. King Yu's people couldn't contact King Yu and were running around in circles anxiously. What should we do now? Is your highness really the mastermind behind this? His confidants looked at each other and shook their heads. If his highness did it, he wouldn't have hidden it from all of us. There's only one conclusion to this matter. His highness was framed. His highness has always had a good reputation. He is also gentle and courteous. No one can find fault with him. Who would have such a huge grudge against his highness and want to push him to his death? There was a moment of silence in the room. After a long time, someone said in a deep voice, "Have you forgotten why King Yu was locked up? Are you talking about the families of those women?" The rest of the people thought about it and felt that it made sense. Aristocratic families cared a lot about their reputation. What King Yu did was like a slap to the face of these aristocratic families. No, there's still an extremely suspicious point in this matter. Why would all those women appear at Star Welcome Pavilion that day? Only a small number of people know about this. Could it be that the Count of Northern Marquis leaked the news? Anyway, this matter needs to be investigated. Shang Junlin's people were paying close attention to the movements of King Yu's people. When the news was reported, Shen Yu also knew about it. Will they trace it back to the hidden dragon guards? Shen Yu held a white chess piece and placed it down. He didn't allow his people to do it because he was afraid that they wouldn't be able to clean up the mess properly. It was a quiet afternoon. Shen Yu had enough of his afternoon nap. He pulled Shang Junlin to play chess with him. Shang Junlin placed a black chess piece down casually. If they find out, the name of the person who did this will be removed from the hidden dragon guards. On the chessboard, they played back and forth. Under the seemingly peaceful surface, each move was filled with killing intent. Outside the chessboard, the two of them placed their chess pieces casually. Since they want to investigate, they should give us a target. If they can't find anything, they will suspect us sooner or later. In short, they had to find a scapegoat. Since they suspect that it's the Count of Northern Marquis, let's confirm their suspicions. Shen Yu made a decision casually. Just as Shen Yu thought, King Yu's people were just confused at the start. When they realized what was going on, they realized that there was something wrong with the whole situation. The strategists that King Yu had spent a lot of effort to train were not idiots. They didn't have any real skills and King Yu didn't think highly of them. Following the clues left behind by the hidden dragon guards, they found out that it was the Count of Northern Marquis. Sure enough, there is a problem with the son of Count Northern Marquis. After all, he is just a son of a concubine. If it was Shen Yu at the start, His Highness would have coaxed him. However, what is Shen Qingran? Why does His Highness think so highly of him? King Yu didn't tell these people about the contents of Shen Qingran's letter. Hence, they didn't know that Shen Qingran had almost become their colleague. Shen Qingran didn't have a good time during this period of time. After creating such a big commotion, Count Northern Marquis was deeply embarrassed. After all, other people were daughters. Why did Shen Qingran, as a man, have to rush? Hence, Shen Qingran was grounded again. In the future, without my permission, don't come out and embarrass yourself. Ignoring Shen Qingran's explanation, Count Northern Marquis left in a huff. He was really blind to think that this son of his could be of great use. He didn't care about the son of his first wife. The more Count Northern Marquis thought about it, the more he regretted it. With Shen Yu's degree of favor, if he had treated him well, the Count of Northern Marquis wouldn't have to worry about the future. Unlike Shen Qingran, this unfilial son, he would only embarrass him. After investigating the Count of Northern Marquis, how could King Yu's men let it go? They started to target the Count of Northern Marquis. Some of their power had been uprooted and they had been entrenched in the capital for many years. The remaining power was more than enough to deal with a declining Count of Northern Marquis. Shen Qingran threw a tantrum. He also felt wronged. He thought that he was the only son of King Yu and that he had finally found the right person. Who knew that he was just a fish in King Yu's fish pond? He was nothing. Concubine Yu tried her best to persuade him to calm down. Shen Yu is also lucky. If I had known that His Majesty would treat the person sleeping beside him so well, I wouldn't have pushed the opportunity to him. My poor son, it should have been you who entered the palace. Hearing concubine Ayu's words, Shen Qingran felt even more upset. If it was him who entered the palace, now Shen Yu, no, the whole Count of Northern Marquis, would they have to live under his whims? Mu Shi told Shen Yu about what happened in the Count of Northern Marquis. After that, she said angrily, Shen Qingran didn't think about it. Even if it was him who entered the palace, would His Majesty like him? Now it is me who entered the palace. No matter how regretful he is, he can't change this fact. Shen Yu slowly trimmed the branches and leaves for Mo Lan. People in the Count of Northern Marquis are all picky. They should have tasted the pain that young master had suffered. Don't worry. It's just the beginning. Shen Yu took the handkerchief from Mu Shi and wiped his hands. Those halos that shouldn't belong to Shen Qingran, he would not let him have any of them in this life. The palace servants came forward and moved the flowers to their original place. Shen Yu put down the handkerchief and asked, "How are the palace maids?" "They have begun to get better. The female doctor sent by His Majesty is very responsible. After a while, they will be able to recover as before." Mu Shi smiled faintly and said, "Their mental state has also improved a lot. They are very grateful to young master for what he has done for them." "What about Eunuch Li?" Mu Shi's face turned cold. He pretends that nothing has happened. These women are missing, but he doesn't care. Meng Yuan's appointment has been issued. It's time to deal with Eunuch Li. Shen Yu's eyes flashed coldly. How is Meng Yuan getting along with him? Young eunuch Meng is easy to get along with. The palace maids and eunuchs all trust him. Yes. Shen Yu didn't directly deal with Eunuch Li and appoint Meng Yuan. Instead, he chose another job for him to learn about Yuzhong Palace. After Eunuch Meng learned of Shen Yu's actions, he wasn't dissatisfied. Instead, he went to knock on Meng Yuan's door. Don't take it lightly just because the job given to you by His Majesty is small. His Majesty intends to cultivate you. Your godfather, I, put down my old face to get this job for you. If you don't do it well, don't blame me for being ruthless. I know. I can feel how His Majesty treats people. I won't let Godfather be humiliated. Meng Yuan's eyes were firm. I won't let His Majesty's cultivation down. It's good that you understand. Eunuch Meng nodded with satisfaction. The situation in the palace changes rapidly. There's a better place than His Majesty. Do you know why I want you to go to Yuzhong Palace? Eunuch Meng planned to make it clear in one go. Because His Majesty values His Majesty. Yuzhong Palace, under His Majesty's intention, is separated from the entire palace system. It's higher than any other place in the palace and won't be disturbed by any other place. Working in Yuzhong Palace may not have as much power as other places, but it's the safest place. After a deep discussion, Eunuch Meng patted Meng Yuan's shoulder. Li Ping, that person, can't even take a good opportunity. You have to learn from him. His Majesty can't tolerate sand in his eyes. You have to watch over Yuzhong Palace. Don't let some big-hearted people dirty His Majesty's eyes. The next day, Eunuch Meng served Shang Junlin tea. Suddenly, he heard Shang Junlin say, "Shen doesn't want to hear anything that will annoy His Majesty in Yuzhong Palace, understand?" This slave understands. This slave has already warned Meng Yuan. Similar things will never happen a second time. Eunuch Meng secretly sweated in his heart. Fortunately, Meng Yuan was taught by him. He knew the root of the problem. He also warned him from time to time. He wouldn't make a big mistake. This time, His Majesty tacitly allowed His Majesty to deal with it himself. If there was a next time, His Majesty would never let it go easily. Li Ping, as usual, is on duty during the rest time, planning to relax. Recently, a new eunuch came to Yuzhong Palace. He was good-looking and popular. Li Ping didn't like him. He had to find a way to get rid of him. Li Ping was thinking about something and didn't notice the abnormal silence around him. "Where are you going, Eunuch Li?" Li Ping was startled by Meng Yuan, who suddenly appeared at the corner. He said angrily, "Where I go doesn't seem to be little Eunuch Meng's turn to care, right? I really don't care. However, His Majesty asked me to take you to see him. Meng Yuan didn't talk nonsense with him. He waved his hand. 2 guards came out from behind him and grabbed Li Ping without saying a word. Shun Yu leaned on Shang Junlin and pointed to the screen not far away. They should be here, Your Majesty. Shang Junlin got up and pinched Shun Yu's face. Zhen knows. I won't delay your business. Shang Junlin went to the side of the screen and sat down. He looked at Shun Yu, who was sitting on the high seat. He had the illusion that his identity had changed. Chapter 63. During this time, Yuzhong Palace had been as usual. Li Ping didn't know that his matter had been exposed. When he was brought into the main hall, there was no trace of fear on his face. Gui Jun, the person has been brought. Meng Yuan respectfully saluted. Li Ping broke free from the 2 guards who were holding him down and knelt down to salute. Gui Jun. Do you know why I called you here today? Shun Yu's tone didn't reveal any joy or anger. Forgive me, Gui Jun, this slave doesn't know. Li Ping kowtowed. This slave believes that he has never made any mistakes in Yuzhong Palace. I don't know why Gui Jun wants to capture this slave. Is that so? Shun Yu coldly looked at Li Ping, who had no repentance. Please explain, Gui Jun. Li Ping believed that he couldn't find any mistakes in his actions, so he didn't take Shun Yu's sudden outburst seriously. Shun Yu had never lost his temper in Yuzhong Palace, and he rarely intervened in the affairs of the palace. Most of the palace servants had a good impression of him. Mu Shi, who served him closely, understood his young master's character, but he wouldn't talk nonsense. Shun Yu didn't like people to serve him closely. Shang Junlin often came here, so the servants in the room were usually Eunuch Meng and Mu Shi. Although he was the head eunuch of Yuzhong Palace, Li Ping had little time to serve Shun Yu. He knew too little about Shun Yu, so he thought that Shun Yu was a person who was easy to fool. Meng Yuan, tell him why I caught him and let all the palace servants in Yuzhong Palace watch. Shun Yu supported his chin with one hand, his eyes without the slightest emotion. Li Ping finally felt that something was wrong. Looking around, almost all the palace servants in Yuzhong Palace were here. If it was a small matter, there was no need to go through so much trouble. For some reason, Li Ping remembered that when Shun Yu first entered the palace, a major event happened in the palace. Blood flowed like a river, and everyone was scared out of their wits. The only difference was that the palace servants who were punished that day were a group of people. Today, he was the only one who was being judged. He looked up at the young man sitting on the high seat. His face was the same as usual, but at this moment, there was a murderous aura. In a trance, he felt that the person sitting on the high seat was not Shen Gui Jun, but His Majesty, who was decisive in killing. His heart sank bit by bit as panic rose from the bottom of his heart. Meng Yuan's voice remained unchanged as he read out Li Ping's crimes word by word. On the 8th day of the 12th month, palace maid Xiao Kui was secretly brought to. With the announcement of one crime after another, Li Ping's face became more and more defeated. When he did these things in private, he thought that he was doing it secretly. The people who did it were all palace maids without any foundation. He assumed that they would not dare to speak of it. Relying on his identity as the managing eunuch of Yuzhong Palace, he could be said to be unscrupulous. Not only that, in order to curry favor with him, some palace servants who knew his preferences would even send people over themselves. Li Ping did not refuse any of them. When he was in a good mood, he would promote a few people to work in Yuzhong Palace. Shun Yu lowered his eyes, restraining the killing intent in his eyes. Fortunately, he had discovered this early. Otherwise, what would become of Yuzhong Palace? Is Li Ping's backer to satisfy his selfish desires and oppress others with his power? For a moment, the hall was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. After Meng Yuan finished reading, Shun Yu stood up and looked at Li Ping condescendingly. Li Ping, do you know your mistake? Obviously, he was only wearing ordinary clothes, but his momentum was so oppressive that people did not dare to look directly at him. Li Ping prostrated himself on the ground and kept kowtowing. This slave knows his mistake. This slave was possessed. Everyone in Yuzhong Palace was summoned. Li Ping knew that he could not be kind. He was wrong. He was wrong. He thought that if Shun Yu did not ask, he would not care about the matters in the palace. He thought that Shun Yu was a soft-hearted person who was easy to fool. Also, if he could be so favored by His Majesty, how could he be a person with nothing but his face? If you are wrong, you should be punished. Drag him out and beat him to death. The two guards ignored Li Ping's crying and begging for mercy and dragged him out. Shun Yu looked down. Today, I want to make one thing clear. As a member of Yuzhong Palace, if you are bullied outside, Yuzhong Palace will be your backing. Similarly, if you are like Li Ping, relying on the fact that you are a member of Yuzhong Palace to commit crimes, the first to punish you will also be Yuzhong Palace. Today, I called you here to tell you that from today onwards, the managing eunuch of Yuzhong Palace will be Meng Yuan. Secondly, I want to warn you not to let what happened to Li Ping today become your tomorrow. Without giving the palace people a chance to react, Shun Yu took them to the place of execution. In the gradually rising smell of blood, he said coldly, I don't want today's matter to happen a second time. It was the first time that the people of Yuzhong Palace had seen Shun Yu so angry. It was also at this time that they realized that just because Shun Yu didn't manage things, it didn't mean that he really didn't know anything. Li Ping's matter was so secretive that even the people who worked with him didn't necessarily know, but Shun Yu could find out everything in one fell swoop. Screams and the sound of sticks hitting flesh mixed together, and the smell of blood lingered. Everyone unconsciously tightened their hearts at this moment. No one noticed that the small group of women who were watching the execution didn't look at the center with fear, but only pleasure. At this moment, a corner of the haze in their hearts was finally blown away by the wind. Given time, time would wash away the pain in their hearts. Although she had seen a bloodier scene last time, she still felt a little weak in her hands and feet after watching the whole process. On the other hand, Shun Yu didn't even blink. After it was over, the palace people dispersed. As soon as Shun Yu entered the room, he was hugged tightly. You. The man buried his head in Shun Yu's shoulder and neck. His hot breath sprayed on Shun Yu's sensitive skin, which gradually turned red. His waist was firmly shackled by the man. Shun Yu couldn't break free and could only be nibbled and pecked by the man. The nibbling spread up from his neck. After a long time, Shun Yu was finally let go. Shun Yu lay in the man's arms and calmed his breathing for a while. Then, he said, Your Majesty, what's wrong? It's the first time I've seen a you like this. I'm a little excited. Shang Junlin hugged Shun Yu. His eyes were full of black fog. Your Majesty is more than just a little excited. Shun Yu felt a certain energetic existence. He said helplessly, Your Majesty, let me go. I won't let go. Shang Junlin's arms tightened, letting Shun Yu closer to him. Just now, when he sat behind the screen and saw Shun Yu's cold and stern appearance, his heart was burning. He just wanted to hold him in his arms and shut him in the room, not letting anyone see him. He had already felt the strangeness in his body, but he didn't want to care. As soon as Shun Yu stepped through the door, he couldn't help but follow his heart and hold him in his arms. Shun Yu was afraid that he would agitate Shang Junlin even more. He didn't dare to move and quietly let him hold him for a while. You is so impressive. After a while, Shang Junlin took the initiative to let go of Shun Yu. Does Your Majesty like it? Shun Yu raised his eyebrows and looked at him. Because of what happened just now, the corners of Shun Yu's eyes were slightly red and there was some moisture in his eyes. Shang Junlin looked more and more happy. No matter how you are, I like you very much. Shun Yu didn't doubt Shang Junlin's words. After all, he had personally experienced it. Recently, the King of Yu's people have been targeting Count North. Shang Junlin took Shun Yu to the couch and sat down. Because of Shun Qingran? Shun Yu thought for a while and remembered that he let Shang Junlin divert the trouble last time. Your Majesty acts really fast. Count North is also angry because of the King of Yu's matter. When the King of Yu's people take action at this time, they will hit the wooden warehouse. Count North was a hereditary noble. The importance of face was not less than that of those aristocratic families. When Shun Qingran lost face, he could still discipline him behind closed doors. However, the King of Yu had invited Shun Qingran to meet him. Wasn't he humiliating them openly? Count North thought that the Count North was not worse than any aristocratic family. Now, there was a king who was favored by the emperor. Although Shen Qingran was a concubine's son, he was not someone who could be bullied. He had not yet found the king of Yu's trouble, but the king of Yu's people came to his door first. How could Count North swallow this anger? Both sides have scruples. They don't take any big actions. It's just a small fight. Shang Junlin said some of the secret actions of both sides. The news has been spread. How can the people behind the king of Yu sit still? Shen Yu leaned back. They are really calm. If they are not careful, they will not be unable to find any clues after so many years. Shang Junlin was not surprised by this result. Forget it. Take it slow. We have plenty of time to waste with them. The progress of the matter of the Grand Commandant was slowed down because it involved the prince. The day of the release of the results was getting closer and closer. Jiang Huiqing still kept in touch with Shen Yu. Recently, he sent letters one after another. Most of the topics were about the release of the results. The time of waiting for the results was always anxious. Even if Chengyu was calm, he was quite restless these days. The two people who could not stay calm sat together and talked. I don't know where Brother Lin and Brother Yu are working. We still don't know their identities. Jiang Huiqing scratched his face. If you don't know, then why are you writing letters to them every day? Chengyu looked at him indifferently. Jiang Huiqing, no one said anything about it. Young Master Yu and I hit it off at first sight. Other than you, young Master Yu is the only one in the entire capital that I am familiar with. Chengyu, have you never guessed their identities? Jiang Huiqing, I guessed, but later I found out that they were not. Forget it. I didn't get to know them because of their identities. If we are fated to meet, I will naturally know. Young Master Yu didn't say anything because it was inconvenient. He and young Master Lin got married because of their family. I don't know if he is living well in the Lin family. Fortunately, young Master Lin is a good person and treats him wholeheartedly. Chengyu almost spat out the tea in his mouth. Why are you worrying about other people's family matters? He really didn't know what Jiang Huiqing would think when he found out the true identities of those two people. If everything went well, he would be able to verify his guess after the court examination. Shang Junlin was the first to know when the results of the examination came out. Do you want to know the results in advance? Shang Junlin changed into his court attire and walked over. It's already out. To be honest, Shen Yu really wanted to know. During this period of time, Jiang Huiqing had been constantly writing to him about this matter, causing him to feel nervous. Shang Junlin was very familiar with Shen Yu, so he immediately saw the faint nervousness on his face. He laughed and said, "Why are you so nervous when you didn't participate?" Shen Yu shook his head slightly. He couldn't tell if he was nervous because of the results or because of something else. This was the first time Shang Junlin saw such an expression on Shen Yu's face. His heart itched, so he moved closer and placed Shen Yu on the short table. You lost." The stone in Shen Yu's heart suddenly fell to the ground. He raised his eyes to look at the man above him. He was surrounded by the man's strong arms and surrounded by a biting cold aura. There was no escape. It's time for you to fulfill your promise. Shang Junlin's eyes were bottomless, as if there was a fire burning in them that could burn everything. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.